Hey, good afternoon, YouTube. We got a Cirucci team brief here. Just me and George here today. Unfortunately, Johnny was a little busy, but we should be doing another stream next week with the full all three of us here. But should be another great one today, which is me and George. But we were going to kick off just what we were discussing before we went live, which is the some of the Jesuit theater underlyings in the Maria Jovanovic testimony at the Trump impeachment hearings, and really like the whole impeachment hearing in itself is a Jesuit circus just to distract and dumb down the American public from what's actually taking place in the world of geopolitics. And the perfect example of that is that the article here, an article from the World Socialist website. Not many websites are covering this, but while this impeachment circus was going on, the Democrats and the Republicans bipartisanly voted to extend the Patriot Act, which was people aren't aware. A Jesuit Georgetown professor, Veit Din, drafted the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was the main reason for the 9/11 false flag. They couldn't have passed this Patriot Act without 9/11 as a pretense. It essentially turns America into a police state, a surveillance state. The government can it legalizes, warrantless surveillance. For instance, it's all a charade, because this impeachment proceedings would get you to believe that, the Democrats and the Republicans are so polarized and, they can't work together on anything. But when it comes to working together to pass bills that are in the Jesuits' interest and that screw over regular Americans, they're very willing to work with each other. So I'll link this article here, but the Patriot Act was extended. I believe it was extended for 4 years, and it was November 21st that this came out. And you can see, that. So, and again, there's no mention of this during the impeachment hearings, and just a great example of the Jesuit theater during the impeachment hearings. I'll turn on my screen share here. Was the I believe this was the first person to testify. It was Marie Jovanovic, who was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. I have her Wikipedia page up here. Marie Jovanovic, you see her, she's the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. And like the whole impeachment hearing was literally pathetic. The Democrats were just like, Trump has been so, such a meanie to you. He was tweeting about you. Do you want like a sucker or a cupcake or something, Marie Jovanovic? We feel so bad for you. That's literally that was the dialogue that was taking place for the majority of her hearings, was just the Democrats saying, this is outrageous that Trump would disrespect such a established official. But you see here, she's been all over the place. She joined the State Department and when Ronald Reagan was president, the night of Malta, Ronald Reagan, who through his executive order 12333 legalized the CIA to smuggle drugs domestically and internationally. He's here, Maria Jovanovic. She's been around quite a bit. She's U.S. Undersecretary for Political Affairs in the Bush regime, George W. Bush. She was U.S. Ambassador to Kyrgyzstan, U.S. Ambassador to Armenia, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs. And just watching this Maria Jovanovic talk, like she's a puppet, Like you would think that being in all these positions, no, just the way she was composing herself in the hearings, like she didn't seem like she had a real grasp on anything when it comes to geopolitics. I think she's more just a puppet. You see, Maria Jovanovic is a diplomat in residence at the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy at Jesuit Georgetown University. Now, I'm going to go into some of the, I have the transcript up of the hearings, because right after Trump relieved Jovanovic of being U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, she immediately went to Jesuit Georgetown. That's the first thing she did. She immediately went to Jesuit Georgetown, and she got a regentship there. But I believe she was even educated at Georgetown. She grew up speaking Russian. Let me see, or Princeton. I believe she also has a degree from Georgetown, or she attended Georgetown. But I just want to go into. I have a footage here. If you can see, I had Mike Quigley. This is what I want to show here. The Jesuit theater is really exposed in Mike Quigley's questioning of Maria Jovanovic, because they're both Jesuit puppets. Maria Jovanovic went to Georgetown, Quigley went to Loyola. But you'll see what I mean here.
Like a Hallmark movie.
You hear that, Joey? It's like a Hallmark movie.
Ambassador. Like a Hallmark
you know what?
movie.
Listen, okay, I realize this was a bit before your time, or you were barely alive, but this reminds me somewhat of the Clinton impeachment hearings of the 1990s. Now, granted, the issue, or officially the issue back then, was Bill Clinton, the U.S. President Bill Clinton's dalliances with Zinsky. Um, and of course, I don't have this in front of me. So Bill
Well,
Clinton
you know,
basically
George, really quickly on Lewinsky, just you're absolutely right. Like it's the same, literally the exact same Jesuitical theater blueprint. Because Clinton's lawyer during that whole Lewinsky circus was Robert S. Bennett, who literally has 3 Jesuit degrees. And Robert S. Bennett is the brother of William Bennett, the drug czar, who also has like a Jesuit degree.
So the U.S. Speaker of the House at the time, I believe, was Newt Gingrich, who's now a convert to the Catholic Church. He grew up Lutheran, was a Southern Baptist for a while, but he finally came home when he married his current wife. He's now a high-level Freemason, allegedly, according to Eric John Phelps, a Knight of Malta. And okay, I'll make that concession. Yeah, I would say. I mean, if Gingrich is not a Knight of Malta, he definitely should be.
His wife, George, or is his wife the correct
yes. Yes. So, anyhow, and of course, the people who are leading the attack legally were Ken Starr and his young protege, Brett Kavanaugh, Associate Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Ken Starr, although he ostensibly is a Protestant, was it Churches of Christ or Disciples of Christ? He went to Baylor, and I don't have this in front of me, but you can find this. His fraternity, was founded by Edmund Walsh.
Oh wow! Edmund Walsh
in the 1920s. So
yeah, people aren't aware.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm saying people aren't aware. Edmund Walsh was one of the most powerful Jesuits of the 20th century.
Yes.
And actually, no, that's very intriguing. And actually, Ken Starr, according to Sherman Skolnick, Ken Starr was like a lobbyist of the communist Chinese government and like a personal lawyer for Wang Sung, who was this like Chinese security official who went to had an official visit at the White House with Jesuit trained Bill Clinton. Just according to Skolnick, Starr was like an official registered lobbyist for the communist Chinese part, the communist Chinese. So you can see it's all, it's completely controlled on all sides. And, Clinton actually never got, officially impeached. It just went through the House and didn't go through the Senate. So ultimately, like nothing really came of it.
And of course, nothing is going to happen to Donald Trump. Now, in the early 1970s, you had Watergate here in America, early mid-1970s, in which there was a break-in at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C., which, according to Mae Brussels, the Knights of Malta own.
Oh, yeah, George, the official construction company that built it was the Societe Generale Immobiliare, which was like 100% Vatican owned. So, like, yeah, it would be correct to say the Knights of Malta, like, own Watergate. To say the Vatican owns Watergate.
Okay, and of course, this is according to Mae Brussels, and she just, for those who aren't familiar with Mae Brussels, it's like her name, Mae, M-A-E, Brussels, B-R-U-S-S-E-L, and it's like Brussels, the capital of Belgium, without the S in the end. So if you can't, you can find hundreds of her videos online. And actually, I found out about her from Eric within the last year or so, and I never actually heard about her while she was alive. She lived from 1922 to 1988, and she lived relatively close to me, maybe 2 or 3 hours south of me, near Monterey, Salinas, California, or Carmel, something like that. But so roughly hour and a half south of San Francisco, and anyhow, Mae Brussels is an acquired taste. She was a bit of the liberal side. She was a lifelong Democrat, but she occasionally gave out some brilliant nuggets according to her research. And she lived, I mean, as I said, she died over 30 years ago, basically the pre-internet era. So she basically had to do things the old-fashioned way. She had to look up print newspapers, print books, and dig things out. Anyhow, but getting to my point, according to Eric John Phelps, and I know we had, people have, certain people have reservations about him. The purpose for Watergate was to get rid of Richard Nixon because he was ending the war in Vietnam too soon. And of course,
George Sherman Skolnick said something similar, but he said Nixon was starting to blackmail the aristocracy about, like, Nixon had inside information how the Jesuits and the CIA murdered John F. Kennedy, and according to Skolnick, Nixon was starting to tell people in the CIA. I presume, like, in Vatican circles, that, like, I'm going to start, exposing you guys. Like, I know all about how you murdered John F. Kennedy. And according to Skolnick, the CIA created Watergate to retaliate and, remove Nixon for making threats. So it makes sense. Okay, so like, it's interesting. Keep going. I'm saying it's interesting, that Vietnam angle also.
Well, and of course, this is a whole nother show in and of itself. But anyhow, so what was okay? My dad was in Vietnam. He was there in the late 1960s in the Air Force, and he said, and he was relatively old. He was well into his 30s at the time, and so because the stereotype is you're talking about kids that are going there like 18, 19 years old, and the that was more so true for infantry. Combat said my dad was Air Force, and he said he couldn't, for the life of him, he couldn't understand why we were over there. They spent billions of dollars back in the 1960s and into the 1970s bombing North Vietnam, bombing Laos, bombing Cambodia, bombing South Vietnam, and on the guise of fighting communism to keep South Vietnam free. But well, even though after America left in 1975, the communists took over and Vietnam was reunified. So it became and of course, that was the same argument they used in Korea in the early 1950s to fight communism, to make sure the North Koreans didn't take over the South. Well, who in America and pretty much anywhere in the Western world, who runs your colleges and universities?
Oh, the Vatican in Rome, and it's the Jesuits have 28 universities in the United States alone, with another like 28 prep schools. The Dominicans got tons of universities in the U.S. The Marinists have universities in the U.S. The Franciscans have universities in the U.S. And just with some of the secular universities, actually, I'll pull this up on my screen here, just so people can see this. Like, it's on the logos of like the big, like the quote unquote prestigious secular schools. And the word prestigious actually is like a funny word because it doesn't mean anything good. Like, to be prestigious means essentially to be like deceptive and to be like precarious. But you see here, here's the Harvard logo. People can see on my screen, and this is a Roman symbol right on the Harvard logo. This is the Roman laurel wreath. This goes back to this is like a military symbol. It's the military laurel wreath of conquest. This is the same logo that's present on the United Nations, the World Council of Churches, the World Health Organization, Georgetown University. This wreath is on the Federal Bureau of Investigation, like the Federal Bureau of Inquisition, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, more like Catholics in Action, has the Roman laurel wreath on it. But this is Harvard University, a quote unquote secular school that has this Roman symbol. And Harvard University invited the pedophile Cardinal George Pell to speak to Harvard grads about like leadership qualities. For instance, and like here's MIT. MIT is another really prestigious quote unquote secular university in America. You see right on their logo, right, and it says the 1861, the date of incorporation. There's the Roman laurel wreath right there on the center of MIT. I'll show you. I think this is also on Yale University. Yeah, here's an older logo of Yale, and you see it's all Latin too. All the obviously the Catholic schools have this, but all the secular schools have Latin in their logos too. You know, Latin is the language of the Roman Catholic Church. But here's Yale with the reef, and Newman Centers. You know, you're the one, George, you got me looking into this. But like the Newman Centers is more undeniable proof that the Catholic Church is in full control of education. There's just in the United States alone, there's over 2,000 Newman Centers. 2,000. And people aren't aware, a Newman Center is named after Cardinal Henry Newman, the famous Anglican convert to the Roman Catholic Church. But almost every secular university in Canada and the United States has a Newman Center on campus, where they teach Catholic philosophy and Catholic doctrines on a secular campus. And just another one, at the Rockefeller University of Chicago, you could say this is the University of Chicago is one of the most powerful secular universities in America. The University of Chicago has a Catholic Lumen Christi Institute located on campus, which is a fully Catholic, essentially a mini Catholic school on the campus of secular University of Chicago. It's profound.
If I could,
I have a school at Oxford. Jump in there, George.
Well, okay, so the Newman Centers were first found in 1888 in Oxford, so appropriately enough. But the first one in the United States was founded 5 years later, 1893, at the University of Pennsylvania. And of course, as you said, there are hundreds of them in the U.S. and Canada. I guess they exist primarily in English-speaking countries. Now, just talking about my experience, I back in 2005, I graduated from California State University, Sonoma State. And right across the street is a Newman Center. Now, those Newman Centers aren't on campus, they're right off campus. And I remember having some interactions with them, or their members, when I was a student at Sonoma State. And during in the beginning of the autumn and the beginning of the spring, the first week or so, you have all your clubs. You have your frats, your sororities, you have your various other activities. You have your hiking club, and you have your skiing club, things like that. And of course, you have Bible study groups, and you have the Newmans. And the Newman Center would have a flyer, and inviting people to come, and is open to all people, Catholics and non-Catholics alike. And one of the other so-called Protestant groups on the campus at the time was InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, IVF. And the other big one, now, they used to be called Campus Crusade for Christ. Well, anyhow, getting back to my point. And so I remember going to the Newman Center booth and getting a flyer, and they said, "Hey, come join the Newman Center. If you're Catholic, you can come to Mass, this Sunday, such and such time. If you're non-Catholic, you can come and check us out. You can join us for a Bible study. You can do sing-alongs, and you can do social activities. You can go bowling, have a barbecue, go out to the beach." And it just seems like a great place. And they oftentimes would do joint activities with the Protestant group, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And it just seems like a wonderful place to hang out, to meet new people. And you would have absolutely no idea, unless they said that it was actually a Catholic organization. They want to make it as appealing as possible, make it as friendly as possible. And so what they do is, as I said, they would often do joint activities with the so-called Protestant, a singing night, they have a prayer night, things like that, and as well as social activities. So that was just simply softening people's or lowering people's defenses. So yes, Newman Centers are a common conduit that Rome will use to infiltrate secular schools. And there are two others they'll use, is those who've been Catholics and people who've been trained at Catholic institutions. They'll hire them as staff, as instructors and professors. Third is, we might have talked about this before, a third, and I think I know you've done at least one video. The third one is Greek societies, frats and sororities. that is often a gateway to Freemasonry. And I'm not sure. Do they? I mean, at your school, do they have Greek societies?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, there's like 4 of them at Brock University.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
that's prevalent like everywhere. That's and I would agree. I think that is like an initiatory step towards joining like the Freemasonic Lodge or the Knights of Columbus or the Knights of Malta. It gets an initiatory step to joining the world of secret societies. And a lot of how these frat works, George, a lot of it is also just purely economical. They'll teach you like they all have secret handshakes and they have connections with all of the biggest corporations with all of these fraternities. Like Jeff Bezos, like that he's worth like $120 billion now, the founder of Amazon. He was in like 2 prominent fraternities, for instance. But what they do is like they teach you like these secret handshakes, and like when you go out to apply for jobs, you do like the secret handshake with the guy you're applying for the job for. You get inside info saying, okay, the guy who's hiring you is also like a Lambda Chi, for instance. Then you do the secret Lambda Chi shake, and then you get the job. And you might get the job over someone that's a lot more qualified than you, but just because you did that secret Lambda shake, you get moved up. So it's a system of economic despotism too, where they systematically enrich members of their own club, and that's how a lot of secret societies. The Knights of Columbus have like a $5 to $10 billion insurance program just for devout Catholics, Knights of Columbus.
Well, I was talking to John when I was talking to Johnny on the phone a couple of weeks ago. We're talking about people who are trying to break into Hollywood, and this is a cliche that you'll go there. You're from Kansas and you want to be a movie star, so you'll move to Los Angeles, and you get an agent and you audition for parts. But in order to survive, you had to get a job. Being a waiter at a restaurant or being driving a taxi or something like that. And you don't get any breaks, even though you may be a good actor. However, if you went to a place like Fordham or Georgetown and they see that on your CV and say, oh, hey, you went to Fordham. Well, we'll give you a shot. And of course, because I went to Fordham, and hey, if you after all, your brother, you went to the same school, you obviously must be qualified for this part. And whether it's the school you go to or the secret society of which you are a member, that opens doors for you. And of course, the other thing you just hinted at was legacy. Well, my dad was part of this frat. My grandfather was part of this frat. So, and they run the bank. The First National Bank of Podunk. So, so since I was obviously part of this frat, and my dad was part of the frat, and my grandfather was part of the frat, they'll hire me, regardless of my qualifications. And if I could just bring up something regarding this Ukrainian scandal or non-scandal, is every cover story, every psyop has to have an element of truth in it, and the more truth that's in it, the better, because it's much harder to create a whole story out of whole cloth. The impetus for the story was that Joe Biden pulled some strings to get his son Hunter to be on the board of directors of this natural gas company in Ukraine.
And actually, George, I don't know if I'll try to find the video. Jesuit Joe Biden is actually on this. He was talking to the Council on Foreign Relations, and he's actually bragging that he got the Ukrainian prosecutor fired. Have you seen that clip?
Yes, I actually saw that on Mark Dice. I saw that on Mark Dice of all places.
Okay, yeah. So it's getting around there, but yeah, that shows it's pretty that's like a pretty guilty admission. Jesuit Joe Biden has 2 Jesuit honorary degrees, and his son Hunter Biden, who's his name has come up a lot in this Jesuit theater theatrics, this grand theatric that we're being exposed to here with this Ukrainian sophistry. But Hunter Biden was a professor at Jesuit Georgetown, went to Jesuit Georgetown, and was a Jesuit Volunteer Corps member in Jamaica. So I think,
okay.
just on that, just quick, I think part of this, violent like push against Trump could just be like also like the Jesuits saying like back off, like Hunter Biden is like one of our protected Jesuit assets and he's like off limits, he's untouchable because he's with us. So you need to like get with the program, Trump, and learn, stay within your limits. I think that could be part of it too, because Hunter Biden is very, very close with the Jesuits. And just but ultimately, I think it's all just theatrics because, like we mentioned earlier in the show, like they passed the Patriot Act, they ramrodded the Patriot Act extension through while this whole impeachment, circus was going on very quietly, and the entire mainstream media they didn't mention a word of the Patriot Act being extended. And ultimately, this could be used to actually because Trump, economically speaking, Trump is very favorable to the elites. Like the 1%, they had the biggest tax cut in American history. For instance, repealed the estate tax. Trump has been like a godsend for like the oil companies, for instance, opening up like America's natural parks to fracking and shale gas developments. Like he made his Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was the CEO of Exxon before he became Secretary of State. His current Defense Secretary Mark Esper was literally like the top lobbyist at Raytheon. And now he's the Secretary of Defense. Trump has the richest cabinet, in American history. His Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, was educated by the Jesuits and worked in a Rothschild bank. Wilbur Ross is worth like $3 billion. He actually got Trump out of financial troubles in the 80s with his casinos in Atlantic City. But Trump's whole cabinet is just stacked, with billionaires. Betsy DeVos, the education secretary, Knight of Malta, Eric Prince's sister, I believe. Eric Prince, war criminal, founded Blackwater, Knight of Malta, devout Catholic. Betsy DeVos, his sister, is Trump's education secretary, and she's a billionaire. And her and Trump toured this Catholic school down in Florida together in 2017 called St. Andrew's Catholic School, I think in Orlando. So in the terms like Trump, Trump is the epitome of the status quo. Like this guy, just like Trudeau, had absolutely zero political experience before coming into office, educated by the Jesuits like Justin Trudeau.
Well, and of course, the last U.S. president not to hold elective office prior or any sort of governmental position prior to Trump was Dwight Eisenhower. And of course,
and say we don't this is the last show we did. I think I read what Eisenhower said at Jesuit Georgetown in 1958. So we all know how much of a just of a soulless Jesuit puppet he was. Like complete Jesuit puppet. Eisenhower was saying to the Jesuits at Georgetown, I want your amount of alumni coming from your school in foreign service to increase like fourfold. That's what Eisenhower was telling the Jesuits.
Well, and you know what? Ike's wishes basically have materialized. So thank you for bringing that up. So we were talking about Jesuitical theater. One of the people who testified last week was a young woman who was an advisor to Mike Pence, Jennifer Williams. She grew up she's from Houston, Texas, but she got her undergrad degree from Georgetown. So Williams is Pence's advisor on Russian and European affairs. Now that was last week. You mentioned the ex-ambassador, the ex-U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Maria Yanovich. She's now a lecturer at Georgetown. Well, it doesn't end there. You mentioned Mike Quigley, who is a Republican from Chicago, a U.S. representative from Chicago. We had to wonder if he's a distant relative of James Cardinal Quigley.
Yeah, great point. And I would say he might also be related to the Quigley who drafted the Hollywood Motion Picture Code, Martin Quigley Sr., Jesuit-trained Knight of Malta, who is based in Chicago. And I believe Quigley he's a Democrat, but it's same thing.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
At this point, there's absolutely zero difference between the two, and the Patriot Act extension, proves that, undeniably.
Okay, so in terms of people who spoke this week, who testified this week, you had Laura Cooper and you had David Hall, both of whom got their undergrad degree from Georgetown. The U.S. ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland. Now, he is of a Jewish background. However, he and his wife, Catherine, live in Portland, Oregon. And Catherine is on the board of directors of Jesuit High School in Portland. So it's just like, and of course,
Actually,
one of the
George, just for the listeners,
young
George, can you just repeat that because that's very significant. Because Gordon Sondland, he's been like a key figure in this whole impeachment circus, and his wife is on the board of directors at Jesuit High School in Portland, Oregon. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's very significant. So that keep going. That just shows the Jesuit machinations behind the scenes.
And of course, almost all the major players in this whole production have been Catholic educated in general, or Jesuitically educated. And not only does it remind me of the Clinton impeachment hearings of the 1990s, 20 plus years ago, it reminds me of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings just over a year ago. I had mentioned Brett Kavanaugh because, as I said, he was the errand boy for Ken Starr. He was his young protege in the 1990s. Now, and so just a reminder, I know we covered this material over a year ago, but Brett Kavanaugh went to Georgetown Preparatory School in Northern Maryland. He's also a devout Roman Catholic. He's part of the Federalist Society.
And people are the Federalist Society is in terms of the quote unquote right side of the dialectic. That's one of the key agencies and groups that the Jesuits have used to infiltrate the court system. Like Leonard Leo, a Knight of Malta, is the vice president of the Federalist Society. And I believe it was Knight of Malta, Leonard Leo, who suggested to Trump to put Kavanaugh, also a Federalist Society member, on the Supreme Court. And they're all members of the Federalist Society. Like I know Jesuit puppet Clarence Thomas, who went to Holy Cross on the Supreme Court, former Monsanto lawyer. He's a member of the Federalist Society. Gorsuch is a member of the Federalist Society also. Trump's other Supreme Court pick, adjacent to Kavanaugh. And Gorsuch, like Kavanaugh, went to Jesuit Georgetown Prep. And, I did a video way back, George, just to jump in right after this. Kavanaugh was actually quoted, I think, in his hearing saying that what happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep. And that's the way we prefer it. I'm paraphrasing the last part, but the quote was Kavanaugh actually said, "What happens at Georgetown Prep stays at Georgetown Prep." That's a quote.
And of course, so if you go, so I'm just thinking, if I had, if I were to wake, if it were for my personal convictions, and if I had the money, I would definitely send my kids to a place like Georgetown Prep, because it's a fait accompli. You're going to be a success at whatever you do. I mean, it has produced at least 2 U.S. Supreme Court justices. It has produced the current general manager of the New York Yankees, as you brought up before, Brian Cashman. Under Cashman's watch, the general manager of the New York Yankees, the Yankees are almost always in the postseason. They've been there since 1923, almost 100 years ago, over 50 times. They've been to 40 World Series and they've won 27 rings. So you basically, it is helpful if your current general manager went to a place like Georgetown. It's also helpful, as you've mentioned before, the Knights of Columbus own both Yankee stadiums, their current one and the one where they were from 1923 to 2008. And it's also helpful if you've had 2 popes perform the Mass at your stadiums.
Oh, great point. Yeah, Pope Paul. It goes back to the '60s with the Yankee Stadium with Pope Paul VI. He was the first one. I think there's been 3 popes there now that have had Mass at Yankees. I think Pope Paul VI did it, John Paul II, and Ratzinger, Benedict.
Oh, okay. I wasn't familiar with John Paul II.
Just while you're talking, I'm gonna see if I can find the photo, because there's actually a plaque of the Pope outside Yankees. Right outside the stadium, there's I think it's John Paul II, but there's a plaque kind of in honor of the Pope outside of Yankee Stadium. which is very fitting because it's all
Yeah.
Jesuitical breaded circus at the end of the day.
Well, I'm envious because John Paul II did do the mass at Candlestick Park in 1989 when he came out to the West Coast, which is, I believe, the only time a pontiff has come to the West Coast. Now so as I said, it was a big deal. He did perform the mass at Candlestick Park, which was the old home of the baseball team, the Giants, and the NFL team, the 49ers. And so that was it. But wow. So if you had the Pope performing mass at your facility, that's like a special anointing, if you will.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, as far as I know, there's never been.
Oh, sorry, what were you saying, George?
Okay, so
I was just saying the Yankees.
So there's never been a pontiff who's.
I was just gonna say, like, the Yankees like epitomize like bread and circus controlled by the Vatican. Like, it's just like you can't, like, it's so like epitomized in the Yankees. Like, it's just kind of it's right in your face if you know what to look for. Here's a plaque here. There's I was wrong. There's like 5 separate papal plaques at Yankee Stadium. Here's one here in commemoration for the Solemn Mass for peace offered by His Holiness Pope Paul VI, October 4th, 1965, here in Yankee Stadium, a gift from the Knights of Columbus. Here's the one plaque here. And, I did a video in 2018. I found that the Knights of Columbus had like a charity game at Yankee Stadium. So, according to that, I presume that they still, have ownership of the Yankee Stadium. And and you mentioned before we went live, George, you were going into a bit how like Babe Ruth, who's probably known as like the greatest Yankee of all time. I think that's pretty safe to say without controversy. But Babe Ruth was the Knight of Columbus and was trained by the Jesuits, or educated by Jesuits.
Yeah. And of course, I don't recall the date, but there's a fellow by the name of Robert Cassadine, who lived from 1906 to 1972. He was a journalist and an author, and he's noted for 2 tomes. One was the Babe Ruth story, which was made into film, starring William Bennix, devout Roman Catholic, and 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, which dealt with the Jimmy Doolittle raid in April 1942 over the Japanese capital. And of course, the raid did virtually nothing. I think they might have destroyed an outhouse, and an old man may have had a heart attack or something, but it did virtually no damage. It was more done for psychological purposes. So anyhow, Cassadine wrote the 2 books, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo and the Babe Ruth story. And Babe Ruth, George Herman Ruth Jr., who lived from 1895 to 1948, was considered to be, he has attained almost mythical proportions in terms of everything he did, in terms of hitting home runs, eating hot dogs, drinking beer, seducing women, you name it. I mean, it's almost like, as I said, he's obtained, as I said, there's all sorts of, there's Babe Ruth the man, and then there's Babe Ruth the legend.
I was saying he's basically been like, and throughout history, like the figures that are puppets of the Vatican get deified through history. George Washington has been deified, and when he was 16 years old, he plagiarized his rules of code and civility from a French Jesuit manual of etiquette, for instance. Mussolini is known as like a great one. Like the Pope referred to as Mussolini as the man sent from divine providence. And still to this day, like the Catholic bishops, respect Mussolini greatly. And there's very few books critical of him for the reason that he signed the Lateran Treaty, which gave the Vatican quite a turned them into like their modern corporate legal personality that they are. But I'm just saying, like, that is a fact though. If you look back in history, people that serve the Vatican are propped up in the history books.
Okay, but see, the thing is with Ruth is, as I said, Well, as a matter of fact, they called Yankee Stadium the house that Ruth built, but it'd be more accurate the house to call it the house that was built for Ruth. And as I was saying before we went on the show, yes, there are some players who prior to him, Ruth hit some home runs, but it was considered to be an anomaly. Prior to Babe Ruth, if you hit 10 home runs in a season, that was considered a big deal. You were a slugger. There was one player, Ned Williamson of the Chicago's in 1884, who hit 27, but that was an anomaly. He was the only, but Babe Ruth was the first player to hit 30, 40, 50, and 60 home runs in a season. He was the first player to hit, okay, forgive me, for those of you who aren't into baseball, just bear with me for a moment. He was the first player to hit 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, and 700 home runs in his career. He ranks third on the all-time home run list at 714. And in addition to being able to swat the ball, he was an excellent pitcher. He won something like over 20 games twice. So you could say arguably he was the best all-round player who ever wore a uniform. And of course, it helps if you're being puffed up by Bob Kazanine in his book. And who was, can you talk again about Maury Povage's, the talk show host? Can you talk about his dad?
Oh, that was Shirley Povich was the Georgetown. He was the Washington Post sports writer for over 40 years. Yeah, Maury Povich's father, Shirley Povich. He was Jewish background, but went to Jesuit Georgetown, and now the Georgetown baseball field is named after. It's called the Povich Field, named after this Washington Post sports writer. But this guy literally spent 20 years of his career, just blowing up Babe Ruth. Literally blowing him up. He's an American hero. Babe Ruth's a patriot. Blah 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 blah. It's just crazy, and that surely, doubtlessly helped lead to, because he essentially Babe Ruth has like a mystical status within like American pop or pope culture is what I call pop culture. But Babe Ruth does have like a mystical status within pop culture, and I was just I wondered. This is something I just now we're mentioning this. I'm gonna look into it more because baseball at this time was very very controlled. Like there was the White Sox scandal of 1919, and the guy who the center of that scandal was it Charles Kaminsky?
Yes,
Charles, and yeah, he was known as the Old Roman. That was literally his nick, the Old Roman, Charles Kaminsky, and he was Jesuit trained. The owner of the Cubs was right at the center of that rigging of the World Series. So and that proves, I don't know, that just shows to me that baseball at that time, was very, very rigged and controlled, just like it is now. So I wonder how much of Babe Ruth, because I'm not going to bash, but Babe Ruth obviously was a good baseball player. I'm not going to say the guy couldn't play baseball, but I wonder how much of his quote unquote greatness and his quote unquote legend status, was manufactured. Because given his Jesuit Knight of Columbus connections, it's very easy. Like most of the pitchers, I bet, like the prominent pitchers in the league at that time also were Catholics. Many of them probably also Knights of Columbuses. It's pretty easy to say, okay, when you're out against Babe Ruth, just go a little easy on him. Like don't throw it as fast as you usually do. Like that's kind of what I'm getting at. I wonder how much of his greatness was manufactured due to his deep papal connections. But obviously, the guy could play baseball. I'm not, taking that away from him.
Well, of course, he it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, if you have the press behind you, if you have Hollywood, if you have the newspapers, and if you have Hollywood behind you, you will become basically deified. You'll be able to, you'll become 10 feet tall, and it's just like. But it wasn't just with Babe Ruth or baseball or sports figures. Is how many other people have they done that with over the centuries? Alfred Hitchcock, the famous director, he died almost 40 years ago.
Oh, great point. Jesuit trained Alfred Hitchcock. People aren't aware.
And his movies, now he's called the master of suspense. He's been dead for almost 40 years, but he's as popular as he ever was. Think of the Beatles. They're probably just, they broke up almost 50 years ago, but they're almost as popular as they ever were. George Martin, their engineer, was trained. Was it at Stonyhurst, I believe, or was it either Ignatius College or Stonyhurst? One of the two. Um, the writer of the author of the Lord of the Rings, John Russell Royal Tolkien, or Tolkien, he went to Stonyhurst, or one of those two. And of course, the people.
Yeah, Tolkien. This is on Johnny's website. I think Doc wrote this article, but it's a really interesting excerpt. He quoted, I think, the memoirs of J.R. Tolkien, but he reprints Tolkien wrote a letter to the Jesuit Courtney Murray, S.J., like a powerful American Jesuit who was one of the main authors of Vatican II. But J.R. Tolkien wrote to the Jesuit Courtney Murray, stressing that The Lord of the Rings is a completely Catholic film. It's an interesting quote. I recommend people check that out.
And of course, just talking about your neck of the woods. This is something that Hawkeye brought up over a year and a half ago. He said there have been at least 10 Catholic Canadian prime ministers. You have the Trudeaus, Brian Mulroney, Joe Clark, Stephen Harper. Is he on that list?
No, Harper wasn't Catholic, but Paul Martin was Catholic. Jean Chrétien was Catholic. So Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien were the two that preceded Harper. Both of them were Catholic.
Oh, okay, and of course,
I think the most Catholic Canadian Prime Minister was like our World War II Prime Minister, Maurice Saint Laurent. Mm-hmm. He came to power right after there was the Marian Congress in Canada in 1947. People should watch this. I have a video on my channel. I'll link it in the chat here. It was done by a Canadian Catholic priest, Maurice Prelou, but he shows footage of the 1947 Marian Congress. But this was a very, because this was a very significant Congress, because the quote-unquote Dominion of Canada was given to the Immaculate Heart of the Virgin Mary. And the reason Dominion was used, because Canada is actually like a British corporation. Canada never gained independence from the British Empire. So it's referred to as the Dominion of Canada, right? Because Canada is not a sovereign nation. That's why the Queen is on all of our currencies, and like the main highway right by me is called the Queen Elizabeth Way. Like the Queen, it's all it's Canada's part of like the Commonwealth. All of like the British Union Jack is on every single like provincial flag. For instance, but that's why they use Dominion. But like in this Marian Congress, it was actually said that the Dominion of Canada was given to the Virgin Mary.
Okay, until the 1960s, the Union Jack was on your national flag. That was it 65, 66, you switched to the maple leaf?
Yeah, it wasn't until the mid 60s. And it wasn't until like our recent constitution didn't get drafted until 1985, I believe. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Okay.
Up until 1985, we still literally had like the British, common law like system, and like it's still a place. Like if you get charged with the crime in Canada, it says like the Crown is coming after you. It says like the Crown versus whatever your name is.
Okay,
it's all subtle. It's just in plain sight. Like we have something called Crown corporations. That's what the here in Ontario, the LCBO is the government-owned liquor store, but it's referred to as a Crown corporation. So it's kind of all in our terminology that Canada is a fiefdom, but people just aren't aware of it. But this Marian Congress is very like that, and this is probably the reason. This is the reason why. For instance, in the province of Ontario, out of the 39 religious school boards, 38 of them are Catholic. 38 out of 39 religious school boards in the province of Ontario are Catholic. The reason being, though, is because literally the Dominion of Canada was given to the Virgin Mary in 1947. And even like the history of Catholic schools in Canada, like the Catholics with the British North America Act of 1867, they were able to get Catholic schools in Canada from day one. It wasn't an issue like it was in the U.S. where like they had to wait until they killed a Catholic, ironically, John F. Kennedy, to put Jesuit-trained Lyndon Johnson in the White House to pass legislation giving federal funds to Catholic schools. So that never really had been an issue in Canada, but just after this Marian Congress of 1947, like the Catholic takeover of Canada just went into full hyperdrive. And now like the Archbishop in our capital city is a Jesuit priest, Terence Pendergast, S.J., kind of unprecedented. That'd be like if the Archbishop of Washington was an S.J. ordained priest. For instance, our prime minister was, and that's another thing too. Like in Canada, like the prime minister is actually the figurehead. You know, our current prime minister Trudeau is a complete Jesuit puppet. You know, and his dad was educated at the same Jesuit school as him. You can see a photo of Trudeau with the Pope when he's only like 6 years old, for instance. But like, the Governor General actually has more authority within Canada than the Prime Minister does. The Governor General is the Queen's direct representative in Canada. Our current Governor General is Catholic, Julie Payette. She's Roman Catholic. And Julie Payette actually murdered someone in Maryland in 2011. She ran over someone with a car and drove away. The Catholic police in Maryland obviously didn't look into it. And now she's our Governor General. But she actually kind of covertly has more authority than Justin Trudeau. And the Canadian press, you know, just keeps Canadians completely ignorant of this. Again, and the Queen actually came here like 10 years ago and said that she's the sovereign ruler. You know, kind of putting it right in plain sight. This current Queen's a Dame of Malta. She's blood related to Andrew Bertie, the former Grand Master of the Knights of Malta.
Okay, if I can just pause you or just 1 second, Eric. You know, you're talking about Canada. I'm not sure we've talked about this before, but I've never looked into Hong Kong too closely. But the CEO of Hong Kong is Carrie Lam. Yes, the chief executive officer of Hong Kong is Carrie Lam.
Yeah, actually, George, that should show people like how government is completely corporate at this point. They're like the head of Hong Kong is called the chief executive officer. It's like you're the chief executive officer of Walmart or the chief executive officer of General Electric. You know, like any company, like that's what the president figure of Hong Kong is referred to. It's, you know, people aren't aware. That just show like the like how, you know, there is no difference at this point between government and this big business. Sorry, keep going there, Judge.
And of course, she is eminently qualified because she went to St. Francis Canadian College, which is a Catholic school, Franciscan. But of course, you know, she has to, even though there are virtually no Catholics in Hong Kong, you know, they had to put her there. Just like the wife, I could go look this up, and maybe you could. The wife of the current president of Afghanistan is a Catholic. She's not Roman. She's Melkite or, you know, but she's part of a church that isn't officially in communion with Rome. The current empress, the wife of the current emperor, she was trained by Catholics. And granted, I know it'd be better if I could give specific names, but these weren't part of the topic. So Rome vicariously runs countries that aren't officially Catholic. They run people who aren't officially Catholic. So as I said, just to recap, almost all the figures that have testified before the U.S. Congress have some sort of nexus with Rome through education, or they're Catholic themselves, or they're on the board of directors of a Catholic institution, such as Catherine Sondland. She's on the board of directors of Jesuit High School in Portland. And when you point this out to people, they look at you as if you have, you know, two heads and three eyes. So what? You know, people have to go to school somewhere. Okay, true. Well, not necessarily. I mean, if you look at Donald Trump, for instance, and his family, he's from New York City, so he had a number of options to where he could have gone to school. He could have gone to the ostensibly secular Columbia or Rutgers or someplace like that, or he could have gone to anywhere in the country. He could have gone to Stanford. He could have gone to the University of Chicago, or he could have gone to Oxford. But his father, Fred Trump, decided to send him to Fordham.
Well, you know, George, that's probably because, you know, Donald Trump admitted, people haven't seen this, Donald Trump admitted at the 2016 Al Smith dinner that Fred Trump, he said, Donald Trump's like exact words that were, "My father took me here as a boy."
So that probably would
have, so the Jesuits at the Al Smith dinner probably told Fred, "Hey, like you should send old Donald to Fordham here. We'll make sure he gets a good education. We'll set him up for future success." It's probably something along the lines of that.
Okay, so you could, all right, you could possibly give Donald Trump a pass on that. However, something I've mentioned before, and this warrants repeating, his son Eric got his undergrad degree from Georgetown. His daughter Tiffany is going to Georgetown Law School. His daughter Ivanka attended Georgetown before she transferred to University of Pennsylvania, as her dad did, to get his degree. So not only was he trained by the Jesuits, at least 3 of his 4 adult children were trained by the Jesuits. Also, Don Jr., Donald John Trump II, his wife Maureen went to Manhattan College, I believe.
Manhattan College is that's Roman. That's a Roman Catholic university, right in New York City, Manhattan.
Yeah. Okay. I'll confirm that.
It makes sense, George. Well, I don't know if you were going to go mention this, but Trump's sister during the 2016 election, Mary Ann Trump Berry, gave $4 million to Jesuit Fairfield University, and she was quoted. She was quoted in the Church Militant saying, "The Jesuits saved my life." That's Trump's. That's Donald. I'm going to repeat that. Donald Trump's older sister was quoted saying, "The Jesuits literally saved my life." And this was during the election. This was before Donald Trump, was in office. So you can see already at that point, I guess for those in the know, that was the signal that Trump would become president. The Jesuits were fully behind Trump. All of Trump's advisors during the campaign, like Paul Manafort, went to Jesuit Georgetown. Steve Bannon went to Jesuit Georgetown. Don McGahn went to Jesuit Georgetown. His current White House legal advisor, Pat Cipollone, went to Jesuit Fordham. Just like Donald Trump, his current White House chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, went to Jesuit Georgetown. And Jesuit trained Mick Mulvaney has kind of played into this impeachment circus because there's stuff that's come out. Oh, Mick Mulvaney knew about the transcript before it came out, or garbage like that. All this emotional. This quote. I'm gonna pull up this quote. Just Tupper Saucy's quote from Rulers of Evil just explains this impeachment hearing really well, because basically the Jesuits. He mentions how the Jesuits are master emotion manipulators, and they'll turn the scene of national politics into a giant spiritual exercise to just to control and regiment people's thinking patterns. And this impeachment circus, I think, is a great example of that. And I would before I am going to play the footage. Maybe I'll do it in a few minutes. But I have the YouTube video up here of Jesuit trained Mike Quigley, in quote unquote questioning Jesuit trained Maria Yovanovitch, and the Jesuit theater comes out in that deposition. They can't help themselves. They start laughing after they mention Georgetown, for instance. But I'll play that in a little bit. Yeah, the whole thing. And I know you mentioned George. It's a great point, but I'll just repeat. You meant all of Trump's most staunch quote unquote critics. All have Jesuit degrees, almost all of them, or they're connected to. They have a nexus with Rome in some way. So it's all. And you see it's all Jesuit theater, but they're not actually rationally opposing Donald Trump. There's many things you can actually criticize Donald Trump for. And of course, like his economic policy is completely unstable. He's the wealth inequality is going to get 20 times worse within the next 20 years due to Trump's economic policies. He stacked the courts with Federalist Society judges. For instance, he's I'm not like a green freak, but Trump is literally gutting America's national parks and selling them off to fracking companies. For instance, he's building the police state. There's many things you could actually criticize him on. He basically sacrificed the Kurds in Turkey. For instance, just 3 weeks ago. So there's many things you can actually criticize him on, but it's all just gaslighting about this Russia and Ukraine stuff, and it's just to put people into emotional thinking patterns rather than rational thinking patterns, which is in Jesuit interest.
Okay, could I just chime in? His Don Trump, Don Jr., his ex-wife Vanessa, went to Manhattan Marymount College in New York City. So, as I said, three of his four, uh, three or four, three or four of Donald Trump's adult children have been at least partially educated by the Jesuits. A fourth one, Don Jr.'s ex-wife, was trained by them, and you talked about his sister. So you could say the whore, i.e., the Catholic Church, the Jesuits, the Counter-Reformation, whatever you want to call it, owns Donald Trump from his toes to the top of his head. As they say, lock, stock, and barrel, stem to stern. Whatever cliche you like to use. However, as something I mentioned before, his starch enemy, his starch adversary, the current Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has almost the same dynamic. As I said, she is Italian Roman Catholic. Her husband, Paul, is on the board of directors of Georgetown. Her late brother, Tommy, went to Loyola Marymount, Baltimore. And at least three of her adult children were trained by Jesuits. Paulie, her son, and Christine went to Georgetown. Alexandria went to Loyola, Los Angeles. So it's almost as if it's the same family. I mean, you got the impression that these people, the Trumps and the Pelosi's, weren't born. They're hatched in a Jesuit incubator.
Well, absolutely. Pelosi and Trump, the Republicans and the Democrats, just recently had no quarrels with each other in renewing the Patriot Act to continue the police state, to continue the surveillance state. That was the act drafted by Jesuit Georgetown professor Veet Din. There's no, dissension between the two parties when it came to renewing the Patriot Act. Like, they got along perfectly well when it came to
and I know I've covered this before, but you're talking about another bitter foe of Donald Trump was the late Senator John McCain, who, the Maverick. And of course, McCain was cool because he was a Southern Baptist, so he was a good Protestant. Even though he too, like Trump, like Pelosi, sent at least three of his children to Jesuitical institutions in Phoenix. Megan went to, was it Loyola or Jesuit High School in Phoenix, and Jimmy and Johnny went to the Brody or Brophy in Phoenix, which is run by the Jesuits. So why is it you have these bitter foes, these adversaries, these mortal enemies? Even though they disagree on everything else, they can agree to send their children to the same institution.
Because it shows like this was in the, what was the document? The moment, this goes back to the 1600s, George. The Monita Secreta, the secret instructions of the Jesuits, that 30-page pamphlet / manual that came out of Poland, I believe. But in that Monita Secreta, it says that it gives instructions to Jesuits that you need to ingratiate yourselves with the wealthy and powerful in society, and begin to educate the wealthy's children. This is that in educating it keeps the aristocracy inside in the Jesuit house, metaphorically. For instance, I did a video this way back. The entire Belgian royal family, the entire new generation of the Belgian royals from ages up 4 to 15 are all being schooled by Jesuits in Belgium. The entire Belgian royal family, the current king of Jordan, Abdullah II, and the heir to the king of Jordan, his son, both went to Jesuit Georgetown. So there will be a Jesuit puppet in control of Jordan for the next 80 years or so. This is the current the Rockefeller family, the current head of the Rockefeller Family Trust Fund, Stephen Rockefeller, the Rockefeller Trust Fund. He went to Jesuit Fairfield. We mentioned this I think on last stream or maybe a couple streams ago, but John Paul Getty, the oil magnate, sent 2 of his kids to Jesuit University of San Francisco.
Well, I think I've mentioned this before. Forgive me for repeating myself, and because this could be the first time anybody's listened to the show, or somebody may have just listened to it a few times before that. But and forgive me for repeating myself. Have you ever watched professional wrestling? And
Yes, I have. When I was a kid, recent years I haven't really watched it at all. But yeah, I am
Well,
aware.
I understand.
I am aware of, like, the Jesuitical theater concept of wrestling.
Well,
Even when I was like in fourth grade, I knew it was completely fake.
well, okay, but I understand it's just as popular in Canada as it is in America, and it's also popular. It's growing in the English-speaking world, the UK, Australia, places like that. And if you okay, I'm only vaguely. I was into wrestling. I knew it was bogus, but that's besides the point. Somebody asked Jesse Ventura, James Yanos, the ex-governor of Minnesota. A reporter asked him once, "Hey, is wrestling real?" And his response was, "Well, is opera real?" Um, and but you have to say, oh, okay. But getting to my point, this lingo goes back to at least the 1950s, and they use slightly different terminology. There's two major concepts in wrestling. One is called the face, and the other one is called the heel. And the face is the good guy. He's the one whom you're supposed to be rooting for. And the heel is the bad guy. So you have the antagonist, you have the protagonist and antagonist.
Oh, there, Trump and Adam Schiff.
Well, yes. Just bear with me for a moment. So the heel not only is the bad guy because he cheats, and he always colludes with the referee. He uses an illegal move, and when he does that, the referee turns the other way. But when the face does the same thing, the referee sees him and penalizes him. But so the crowd is supposed to love the face and hate the heel. And of course, oftentimes, and this is developed in the last 20, 30 years. Oftentimes, there's fluidity. Somebody, 1 week somebody will be healed, the next week he'll be a face. They'll switch back, and they'll form alliances. They'll team up together. And if you ever watch professional wrestling now, it's basically, even though the players have changed, it's basically the same. So there's always the trash talking before the event. Somebody will say, well, last week in Kansas City, or last month when we faced each other in Kansas City, you stole my belt, and I'm now here in Toronto to win it back. And I'm not going to let you cheat this time. And of course, they talk all sorts of trash about each other, and they say you're ugly and your mom dresses you funny and all that sort of stuff. But in reality, most of these people are good friends. They hang out with each other. They go to the bar afterwards. They have dinner. But the acrimony is all for public consumption. Now, so what's my point here? Well, politics is basically, particularly here in America, has devolved into professional wrestling.
Well, literally, the current president, Trump, was at WrestleMania with Roman Catholic Vince McMahon and the whole Catholic McMahon family propping up the WWE empire. Yeah, people, it's incredible. Like, literally, a reality TV star is president of the United States,
Yes.
Powerful, Western country in the world.
Well, as I just said, Jesse Ventura, James, was the governor of Minnesota back from 1999, 2003. He was back in, was it 1986, 87? Ventura was in a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the future governor of California. So I guess, and of course,
George, I know we mentioned, it's just a key point of Schwarzenegger. I think it just shows the Jesuit ties. His wife has a degree from Georgetown, which probably helps in why he was placed as governor of California with absolutely zero political experience whatsoever.
Okay, at least Ventura was. Okay, at least Ventura was a mayor of a suburb of the Twin Cities, Brooklyn Park or Brooklyn Heights or whatever it is, and of course, somebody who may be listening from Minnesota can correct me. But so he did have Ventura did have limited political experience. So yeah, how is it Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had no prior political experience is not actually wasn't even born in America. How did he become the governor of the largest state in America?
Yeah, I was saying California is huge. Like California is the 10th biggest economy in the world. If you just keep it as a state, there's more people in California than Canada.
Yes,
California is massive.
Yeah, yes. However, things okay. Yeah, Schwarzenegger wasn't a great governor, but has only got worse since then. I mean, at least he tried to be somewhat restrained in his governorship, but his successors, Jerry Brown, and his current one, Gavin Newsom, they're just worse.
Well, they're both openly Jesuit, like subversives and puppets. Like, you know, Jerry Brown was a Jesuit seminarian as well, went to Santa Clara, and Newsom also went to Santa Clara. Does Newsom have more than did he also go to like a Jesuit prep school too?
Well, Jerry Brown did. He went to Ignatius High School in San Francisco, so he was trained by them for 7-8 years, something like that. And of course, his sister Kathleen I believe, went to Georgetown, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, she worked at Goldman Sachs, I believe.
Yes. So, and of course, but see, Jerry Brown right now is not a practicing Catholic. He considered, maybe. I mean, I've heard people say he's gone to mass, but he tried his hand at being a Buddhist for a while.
I was gonna say I'm pretty sure he was like Zen Buddhist now or something like that.
Well, it's interesting. I wasn't going to bring this up, and this is way off topic. So just if you can just give me a few minutes. Jerry Brown did try his hand at Buddhism, as did Steve Bannon and Raymond Daniel Manzarek, who the keyboardist for the Doors. And as a matter of fact, I believe Manzarek converted over to Buddhism. I'm not sure what type. When he married his wife back in the 60s, his wife, Mrs. Manzarek, is of a Japanese background, so Ray switched over to her tradition. But as I said, Stephen Manzarek, the keyboardist of the Doors, who lived from 1939 to 2013, grew up Chicago Polish Roman Catholic, went to St. Regis High School in Chi-Town, got his undergrad degree from DePaul, and in the early 1960s was involved with Army intelligence, where he was actually stationed in Laos. So by the 1960s, he was out of the Army and was living in Southern California. He was out of the U.S. Army living in Southern California, and where he happened to meet son of a U.S. Navy Admiral, Jim Morrison. Jim's dad, Steve Morrison, happened to be in charge of the U.S. fleet at the Gulf of Tonkin during the Gulf of Tonkin episode.
Yeah, which was like essentially like a 9/11 type false flag, you know, back then in the 60s. Essentially, it's the same, you know, to a smaller scale. They used it to justify the war, just like they did 9/11 with Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, the justified Operation Rolling Thunder, which authorized the U.S. Air Force and Navy to bomb North Vietnam, and less than a year later, they sent in the U.S. Marines into Da Nang Air Base, and of course, this is all when Lyndon Johnson had become U.S. president after his predecessor Jack Kennedy had his little mishap in Dallas.
Actually, George, I found the original source document for this. I'm going to put this in the chat. I found the document from the Washington Post back in it looks like Internet Archive's doing a scheduled maintenance right now, unfortunately. But if people go to my archive.org account, Eric Bowman 77, I have the archive. The article is called "Catholic Church Missal, Not Bible," used by Johnson for oath at Dallas. And you can actually see a photo in this Washington Post article of Lyndon Johnson being sworn in on a Catholic missal after JFK was assassinated. by the CIA. This was right around the same time also that J. Edgar Hoover received his Sword of Ignatius of Loyola from Jesuit Loyola University in Chicago. Johnson spent a year or two at Jesuit Georgetown as well. He had all of his close advisors in the White House were Jesuit trained, like Joseph Califano, for instance. And I did a post. I'll link the post I did on Lyndon Johnson, because he passed a very monumental bill of legislation called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, 1965, which forever changed the academic landscape in the United States, because this got the federal government giving billions of dollars to sectarian schools, but 95% of the funding from day one went to only Catholic schools out of the whole branch of sectarian schools. And I sourced that in the post I did on Johnson. You know, he was just a disastrous president. You know, the war in Vietnam, you know, the crimes that you just mentioned, and you know, Johnson sent federal troops into Detroit. You know, this further solidifying America as a Roman police state. You know, the mayor of Detroit at the time, Jerome Kavanaugh, was educated by Jesuits, just like Johnson. And you know, the governor of Romney is a Mormon. You know, I in the video I did on Mormonism, I found the Jesuit Jean-Pierre de Smet was actually instrumental in the creation of Mormonism. It was actually this Jesuit who recommended the Mormons locate the Salt Lake City for their headquarters. And I believe there's actually a statue of the Jesuit Jean-Pierre de Smet in Salt Lake City at the main Mormon temple. For instance. And, you know, Mitt Romney was endorsed by the Vatican ambassadors. The former U.S. ambassadors to the Vatican endorsed Mitt Romney for president. In 2012, they made a statement about that. So, but, you know, Johnson was just, you know, disastrous, you know, for the United States. I think I don't think enough. And actually, you know, I'll link. Actually, unfortunately, my archive.org account is down. Let me see if I can pull up the note here on email. Did you see the email I sent with that document from this U.S. Brigadier General Herbert Holdridge in 1963? But yeah, he wrote a letter to the Attorney General of Texas, Carr Wigener, saying that Lyndon Johnson was complicit with the Vatican in the murder of John F. Kennedy. Hopefully my archive.org account, people can find this document on there, but it's a very interesting document written by Herbert C. Holdridge. He's right here. I'll read a little bit. Lyndon B. Johnson was a co-conspirator with Kennedy and the forces of the Vatican in the fraudulent election of 1960. He is equally guilty with Kennedy for every crime committed. He accepted without protest the Pope's seditious orders that all Roman Catholics vote for Kennedy. And Kennedy was in a very, you know, he had to operate in a very tight framework because of how much of a, like, his connections to his Knight of Malta daddy is the only reason he became president. Like, you know, he had a family Jesuit, McSorley, you know, mentoring him. So Kennedy, like, I think it was a kind of like the Vatican felt outraged that Kennedy wouldn't give federal funds to the Catholic Church, given how close John F. Kennedy was to the Catholic Church. But Kennedy did, like, he stacked his cabinet with Wall Streeters, for instance, like Dean Rusk of the Rockefeller Foundation, McGeorge Bundy, another Rockefeller Foundationer, was in Kennedy's inner circle. Skull and Bonesman Robert Lovett, was in Kennedy's inner circle. I think it was later in Kennedy's administration that he started to break off. Although it was 1960 where he gave his speech where he said that he wouldn't, bow down to the Pope. But he was just in a very, tough position because, being a first Roman Catholic president, he also had the suspicion of guys like her. And this, what I'm reading here from Holdridge, was written in 1963. But Kennedy, had the suspicion of guys like Herbert Holdridge who thought that him being Catholic, he's going to be a puppet of the Vatican. But I'll just read a little bit more here. Holdridge says that Johnson engaged in every political fraud which brought Kennedy to power, was responsible for the mammoth frauds perpetrated in Texas by his own political machine. Actually, I'll find a way for you guys. Oh, I see you're out of the stream there, George. I'm just going to share my screen here so people can see the letter I'm reading. But you see here, I'll just read a little bit more of this. This is from a U.S. Brigadier General Herbert C. Holdridge wrote this letter to the Attorney General of Texas. You see here, so Johnson was he accepted the mammoth frauds perpetrated in Texas by his own political machine. Johnson made the pilgrimage to Knesset to yield allegiance to the Pope, invalidating his oath to the Constitution, and after Kennedy's inauguration became a willing accessory to every executive crime. Kennedy's inauguration being fraudulent, and by adhering to enemies of the United States treason, Johnson's inauguration was identical, and he is no more a legal president than who would have been the lowliest wino snatched from Skid Row and hastily sworn in as president. 2. Johnson's purpose to continue the seditious policies of Kennedy was made plain in his address to Congress. His adherence to the Kennedy policies in Vietnam, involving the murder of Buddhist monks and the subsequent murders of Diem and New. Both of them were Catholics. And actually, the guy who replaced Ngo Diem, Nguyen Van Thieu, who was elected in 1967 and served till 75, was also a Catholic. And that's right on his Wikipedia. Here, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, you see here he was Roman Catholic, converted to Roman Catholicism during Diem's rule. There's a lot of people don't know that. Diem people are aware that there's a devout Roman Catholic, but the president of South Vietnam that came in 1967 was also a devout Catholic. I'll read a little bit more here from this Brigadier General Herbert C. Holdridge. He says here, so the murders of women, all under inspiration of the CIA, adherence to support of the Wall Street shark, which has bankrupted the United States in its raids against the sardines of Latin America under the guise of an already aborted Alliance for Progress. Johnson's reliance on H-bomb diplomacy as the ultimate international instrument, pledge of loyalty to the United Nations, controlled by nations by enemies of our Constitution, but not one word spoken of loyalty to the Constitution in the Bill of Rights. Talking out of both sides of his mouth, a very gem of Jesuitical double talk, undoubtedly written by a Jesuit. So Holdridge is saying that Johnson's inauguration speech he thinks was ghostwritten by a Jesuit. You see Johnson's crocodile tears over the murder of Kennedy, but not one word of responsible executive purpose to uncover the hidden criminal who helped plot the 2 assassinations, preferring, like the police of Dallas, to announce by silence that the record of Oswald is now closed. And I repeat, like hell it is. This is Herbert C. Holdridge talking. As a longtime Texas politician acquainted with every political outlaw and having access to all facts or rumors prior to assassinations, and more surely subsequent thereto, remaining mute through the world, let me see here. Stutters at the open knowledge of the murder of Oswald to cover for the real criminals. He's talking about Johnson, indicating clearly that Johnson possesses guilty knowledge, or is himself a participant in the crime. He had something to conceal himself. He would have taken the initiative for a full investigation. In any murder, a compelling question is who had the most to gain. The obvious answer is Lyndon B. Johnson. For all his fearful regrets, participating in the 4 days of vulgar Vatican ballyhoo, turning a fraud and criminal into a saint, squeezing every ounce of political and clerical advantage out of the cadaver of the dead Kennedy, as had been done during life, including the exploitation of his entire family. Undoubtedly, this is 7 here. Johnson undoubtedly prepared to accept Robert Kennedy as vice president for the 1964 elections, as already hinted to permit the Pope to play both ends against the middle. The ascension of John McCormick, if Johnson dies, as was predicted along with Kennedy, or Robert Kennedy, if Johnson lives, to keep, what is this word here? To keep, this letter is, some of the words are kind of tough to read. People can see the letter I'm reading here. To keep a foot, this is a foot. To keep a foot in the crack of the door to perpetuate the fallen Kennedy dynasty. Were the communists involved in these murders, Johnson and the Vatican would have exploded their full propaganda against the USSR. The fact that they've remained mute indicates that they've realized that their own involvement, know where the bodies are buried, and rely upon the seditious, falsifying mobster press controlled by the Vatican and Wall Street to cover their crimes. And then he just wraps up here. In view of the above, I demand that Johnson be questioned under oath and his actions subjected to the same thorough investigation demanded of other subjects. The Constitution cannot be defended otherwise. If people haven't seen that document, it's interesting. So, people, this guy was a former brigadier general. So this is written in 1963. So right after the assassination, people were aware of the Jesuit involvement. I reposted a letter I blog in my community page on YouTube of a letter written by a woman, Hannah Erickson, to the Dallas Police Department. Let me see if I can. Did you see that one, George?
I did not.
I'll just let me. Where was the tab here? Okay, I found this from the Dallas Police Department archives. Yeah, this comes from the John F. Kennedy Dallas Police Department collection. It says here, an anti-Catholic letter, November 22nd, 1963. There's the document right here. If you can see on my screen, but this letter, this woman Hannah Erickson, says that I'll read a bit of it here. You'll find this interesting. She sent this from Idaho Falls, Idaho. She sent this the day Kennedy died, November 22nd, 1963, and yesterday was the 66th anniversary of Kennedy's death. But this woman Hannah Erickson wrote to the police department of Dallas, Texas. She wrote, "Gentlemen, as an American, I demand you stop blaming a man who is obviously being tried for being a communist and not truly for assassination," referring to Lee Harvey Oswald. "It is altogether too evident that you have no intention of actually seeking the real culprit. Every attempt on the lives of every one of our presidents, successful and unsuccessful, have been committed by members of the Catholic Church. 3 times Lincoln escaped. Once in Boston, the mob was led by the Jesuits. Jesuits planned his assassination when it did happen, and it was planned in the home of the Ciruccis, who were Catholics. John Surratt hid in a monastery in Italy after being spirited out of the United States through Canada by Jesuits. I know, as does every informed American, that most policemen in most of our cities are Roman Catholics, and that all of you belong to the Holy Name Society, and we also know that all of you are potential police state officials. Accusing a man to be a communist is an old trick of you Catholics. We know you are framing him," referring to Oswald. "God knows we don't want communists who are not being watched, but by God, we need you goddamn Catholics watched even more." And then she says, "I want the real murderer caught." You can see exclamation marks here on the document. And then she says, "You Catholics are taught to murder from the day you are born. You will stop at nothing to overthrow our form of government. This accusation against a known communist is just the type of thing you Catholic trash would pull. I demand you find the Roman Catholic John Bircher, Joe McCarthyite segregationist that murdered John F. Kennedy. Exclamation marks. Yours sincerely, Hannah Erickson." So this was sent to the Dallas PD the day of the assassination. So so people were aware of what was going on right at that time, and so in the letters I just read for people, one was from just like I think this Hannah Erickson was just a regular woman out in Idaho, and Herbert C. Holdridge had a history with the U.S. Army. He was a brigadier general during World War II.
Okay, there's earlier this year you posted the video where John F. Kennedy, then Massachusetts Senator John F. Kennedy, and Democratic presidential nominee, spoke in front of a group of Protestant ministers in Houston, Texas, called the Greater Houston Ministerial Association, in September 1960, just a couple months before the election. And he gave about a 10-minute speech in which he basically said, as you said earlier, even though I'm a Catholic, don't worry, fellas, I'm not going to let the Pope or any of his subordinates tell me what to do. I'm going to run the country the best way I see fit. I'm not going to let a priest or prelate tell me what to do. And I had actually seen that video before you sent it out. However, what people probably are not familiar with is something that's just as interesting. Is he did a 30-minute Q&A session after his speech, in which people could ask him, about his views and to get further clarification. Now, as I said, it was only about 30 minutes long, so he only was able to field maybe 4 or 5 questions. But it's interesting. Now, granted, Protestantism wasn't completely dead in America in 1960. It was moribund. It was on his life support. But you still had a few people in this country who has some who knew their history and who knew their Bible. And I don't mean to make this a religious discussion. So one of the pastors, a Presbyterian, I guess in the Houston area, said, "Excuse me, Senator Kennedy, are you familiar with Pius IX's syllabus of errors?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, according to that document, which came out in 1864, so it was almost 100 years old at the time, he said, he basically said freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, basically all the American ideals are antithetical to Catholicism. Could you clarify that?" And he said, "Well, I'm only vaguely familiar with the document, but if we wrote that, I don't agree with it." And
Oh wow! I wonder if I don't know. Would that be possible that John F. Kennedy would only be? I don't know. I think although it is an old document, but I presume all because he would be a more educated Catholic, if you will. Like I presume the educated Catholics know the history of their bulls and encyclicals.
Well, yes, and of course, one of the things
if he said I don't agree with it, that would infuriate the Jesuits because the Jesuits wrote that encyclical for Pope Pius IX.
Okay. And one of the things that came up is another minister asked him, "So, are you familiar with the concept of mental reservation?" And Kennedy responded, "So, are you basically saying it's just simply a fancy way of lying? In other words, it's like if you take an oath, you don't have to mean it." He said, I do hereby swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States, so help me God. And even though you have no intention of complying with it." And the minister said, "Yes." Well, boy, that's tough. You see, thing is, you were just saying this earlier. Kennedy was in an untenable situation because there's no way he was going to make anybody happy. If he kept his word and said he was going to be an old school liberal Catholic, i.e., not recognize the temporal power of the papacy, infuriate Catholics. But if he went back on his word, he's going to infuriate Protestants. So he was in a lose-lose situation.
I'm saying his dad. I'm pretty sure Joseph Kennedy. I'd classify as more of an ultramontane Catholic. He was a Knight of Malta. In the book "The Catholic Church in Hollywood" by Alexander McGregor, Knight of Malta Joseph Kennedy issued a memo to Hollywood directors saying you have to stop showing the Nazis in a bad light because the Nazis are our friends. Essentially, that's what Joseph Kennedy said. So it's a very different mindset between that Kennedy was trying to express in the mindset even of his own Catholic family. Mm-hmm. Joseph Kennedy was one of the guys who short-sold Wall Street during the Great Depression, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course,
even on his Wikipedia page, I think Roosevelt's, what was I saw the quote on Johnny's website. Roosevelt's son-in-law even admitted that in his memoirs that Joseph Kennedy was one of the main short sellers during the Great Depression crash. So you're right though. Just keep going. Kennedy was in a bind just because even with his own upbringing, especially that he was Joseph Kennedy's the U.S. ambassador to Britain, the head of RKO Studios. Joseph Kennedy was a powerful, Catholic aristocrat, especially during the World War II era. So there's probably just on that alone, there's an incredible amount of pressure for Kennedy to perform for the church. And that's why, again, I'm sure they were very upset when Kennedy didn't want to give federal funds to the Catholic Church. And that's when Jesuit-trained Joseph Califano, in his recent book, The Triumph and Tragedy of Lyndon Johnson, said that was one of Lyndon Johnson's most treasured bills that he passed. Jesuit-trained Lyndon Johnson. The Elementary Secondary Education Act, giving federal funds to the Catholic Church. So, and in the book Vatican USA by Nino Labello, this is all in the link I sourced up above on my post on Lyndon Johnson, but it was the apostolic delegate to Washington, Cardinal Bagnozzi, gave a, quote, negative report to the Vatican about John F. Kennedy. Because in Bagnozzi, Nino Labello quotes Bagnozzi saying that, complaining about how the recent Protestant presidents were more friendly to him than the current Catholic president, and that he was upset about that. You know, and
Well,
I'm pretty sure even
you
in
know,
Eric John Phelps's book, there's a source where he quotes like a source saying that Kennedy didn't allow Cardinal Spellman at the White House,
yes.
which that's a big thing. You know,
Well,
Spellman
of
was
course,
educated by Jesuits at Fordham and is essentially a Jesuit. Like, you know, Spellman was a mover and shaker in the hierarchy of that time.
well, and of course, I mentioned we've talked about Francis Joseph Cardinal Spellman. Now, I mentioned this when we did the show a couple weeks ago. One of the players, or one of the low-level actors in this current production, Ukraine Gate, is Elise Stefaniak. I wonder if she's any relations to Aloysius Cardinal Stefaniak.
Yeah, it's a good question, and actually, I'll link the transcript from one of the Maria Yovanovitch's testimony here, because Stepaniak, the Republican, was praising Georgetown while Maria Yovanovitch was testifying, which is what an insider, if she is, have any relation to Stepaniak, that's what she would do. She would be sucking up to the Jesuits.
And of course, even though the prelate, the historical, the Archbishop of Zagreb, who lived from 1890 to 1960, technically speaking, he was not a Jesuit, but he was trained at St. Gregory's Pontifical Academy. So, for all intents and purposes, he was a Jesuit, just like his. Now, Stepaniak, Archbishop Stepaniak, was the spiritual coadjutor. Ante Pavlovic was the temporal coadjutor. And this is something we may not have articulated before. Rome cannot get her business done without temporal coadjutors, puppets, servants in the secular realm, presidents, prime ministers, generals, governors, attorney generals, senators, you name it, political and governmental figures who get things done on the national and the lower levels, because it works together. The spiritual coadjutor represents the golden key of the Vatican flag. The temporal coadjutors represent the spiritual or the silver key of the Vatican flag.
No, that's a great point, George. And I'll link the article I did on the National Security Agency, because they actually admit on archived off their website, the direct source where they admit that the key, the silver key on the NSA, which is the Pope's temporal coadjutor key, as you just mentioned, they say that this is our key to security, and it dates back to the Apostle Peter's power of loosening and binding. And then in the Catholic Catechism, they say that the Pope is the direct ancestor of the Apostle Peter, who has the Apostle Peter has transferred the powers of loosening and binding to the Pope. So, like, in other words, like the NSA, like the key on the NSA logo is the Pope's key. And I think that's the same key that's on the logo of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation has a papal key on it. I know the United States Treasury logo also has a papal key on it.
Oh, you know what? I was just looking
with the symbolism, like you said, like the civil powers, like are instrumental for the Vatican's. They couldn't control the world without the civil powers to do so. But even like with all the current civil powers, today, the symbolism that they're controlled by Rome is all there, like right in plain sight. Just even like their official seals and logos of the various departments. Like the Russian Federal Penitentiary Service has the Roman fasces on it, and the Russian Federal Bailiff Service has the Roman fasces on it. The Norwegian National Police has the Roman fasces on it. The Swedish National Police has the Roman fasces on it. Even when Elizabeth II, the current Queen of England, was being coronated back in the 50s, she had these two massive Roman fasces with tridents coming out them on her carriage. Like, are you kidding?
Well, and of course, if you're going to back up for a second, you're talking about Russia, which is for almost 1,000 years, the dominant religious body there has been the Russian Eastern Orthodox Church. In Norway and Sweden, for close to 500 years, the dominant church there has been the Lutheran. So these countries are supposed to be non-Catholic, or at least for a long time have not been officially Catholic. But Rome controls them from behind the scene.
Well,
I
absolutely.
mean,
You know, George, we mentioned earlier in the show, like how, like, you know, historical figures will get like the Great title placed on them if they're servants of the Jesuits. But Catherine in Russia is a great example of that. She's referred to as Catherine the Great, and she's called the Great because she brought the Jesuits into Russia in the early 1800s. That's the only reason.
Well, and of course the actor.
I posit that's the only reason.
And of course you had the act. Now this is before your time, but you had the actor comedian Jackie Gleason, who's probably best known for his role of Ralph Cramden on the TV show The Honeymooners. He was known as the Great One, and he was a devout Roman Catholic.
Oh, no, great information, George. Yeah, that show is a bit before my time. I haven't seen any. But
yes,
from what I've seen, Hollywood is just well, considering too that like a literal. I have the guy's autobiography, but it's on my archive.org page. I'll see if the maintenance is done on the site right now. But like the official Hollywood Motion Picture Code that was drafted in 1930 was drafted by an ordained Jesuit priest, not just a guy that was Jesuit trained, but an actual SJ, fourth vow. Daniel Aloysius Lord, SJ, and I have his physical copy of his autobiography called "Played by Ear," the autobiography of Daniel A. Lord, and he admits, like in his autobiography, that like they on purposely hid the fact that a Jesuit wrote the code because he didn't want, quote, bigotry to expose that the Jesuits are completely in control of Hollywood.
Well, of course,
just knowing that fact, George, just quickly, like it's not a coincidence that like after a Jesuit drafts the motion picture code, like the Legion of Decency was created. And if Americans aren't aware, like for 35 years of Hollywood history, there was like strict Catholic censorship over Hollywood. Like the Legion of Decency could actually, you know, prevent movies from being published. That's how much influence they had. And the head of this, the quote unquote secular Production Code Administration, Joseph Ignatius Breen, was like triple Jesuit trained and had a Jesuit as his brother. Like,
and of course, so you have somebody representing the silver key and somebody representing the golden key. Breen was the silver key, and Lord was the golden key in that example. And of course, as something we discussed before, even though they'll create something that like the Hollywood Production Code back in the 1930s, they'll almost always have a Jew as the front man to create the illusion, oh, it's the Jews who run Hollywood. It is the Jews who run the banks. Or
what was the at that time? Who was the Columbia Pictures? Harry Cohen. I read this in Sean Wilcox's book Jesuit Hollywood, which is on my archive.org page. But Harry Cohen, the mob boss of the Jew mob boss that was head of Columbia Pictures, had a Roman Catholic wife, and this Harry Cohen would hang out at in Catholic Italy at Mussolini's villa. Like that's where he spent most of his time. He spent most of his time with Mussolini.
Well, according to our friend John Phelps, Mussolini, one of his mistresses was Jewish, which is why initially I'm not studying Mussolini in great detail.
Actually, I think that's correct. David Kurtzer, in his book, I have a physical of it, but it's on my archive.org page too. The Pope and Mussolini. I think that's mentioned in there too. Mussolini had a Jewish lover for like a brief period of time.
Well, and of course, initially for 10, 20 years, he was gung ho to serve Rome, but the Catholic Church. But I guess the problem with Mussolini, this is speculation, is he wants soft. Having this Catholic or this Jewish girlfriend made him not want to persecute the Jews in Italy. And so I think they could have given him a pass on having the Jewish lover, but when he didn't carry out on persecuting the Jews in Italy, that was the final straw. So he had to go.
Right after they replaced him with the military dictatorship with Marshal Badoglio.
Okay.
In 44, and it was all like highly, it was a very controlled takedown of Mussolini, and the Concordat with Mussolini that was signed in 29 is still in effect to this day. So all the governments after Mussolini like kept all the concessions that were given to the church, in place. I think Mussolini at that point, he became like dead weight because I also think it was at the point where like the Vatican realized that like Hitler would be defeated and the Nazis, which they were very upset about that, greatly so. But they realized that the Allies would be victor during the Second World War, so Mussolini became kind of like Joseph Tiso, the Catholic priest who was a fascist dictator of Slovakia. But he, like Mussolini, became dead weight, and they want this. It looked bad. It would look bad, PR wise, only public PR wise. That's why they would want to separate themselves from Mussolini. And Mussolini's confessor was a Jesuit, Taci Venturi, S.J. So he was, the perfect place for them to double cross Mussolini once their use for him was over. Because like all Vatican, diplomacy, they're only out to serve their own ends, and once you're not useful to them anymore, like anyone's expendable to the Jesuits.
Well, sometimes they will give people passes. For example, Idi Amin, when he was overthrown in 1979, he spent the remainder of his life in Saudi Arabia, where he died back in 2003. Harry Truman died of old age, ostensibly. I mean, he was 80 plus when he died, and Churchill was about 90 or so when he died. So they don't always kill the people who've outlived their usefulness. They'll sometimes let them go to pasture if they just know how to keep their mouth shut.
No, I agree, George. Just there's I think it's another false alarm, but the fire alarm's going off here.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like a truck or something, or like a garbage truck.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's probably like is it loud? Like, is it kind of faint, or is it?
Well, yeah, it's like a beeping. Well, we'll just deal with it.
I'm saying I'll mute my mic here for a little bit, just while like this. Oh, I'm sure it'll be off in a couple minutes. It's probably another kid left the oven on or something like that. It's a guaranteed a false alarm. It'll be off in a few minutes.
Okay, but we can just deal with it because, as I said, the show is almost over. It's almost 3 p.m. Eastern. So
were you? Did you want to take off around the 2-hour mark or a little less?
Well, if we could. So there's something I had wanted to mention. I emailed myself to see what my talking points should be.
Actually, just before I was looking up the chat here, Siggy from Dem Dar Hillsman said that he brought up FBI agent Peter Stork had his dad is a Jesuit. That's a good point. Yeah, and Stork went to Georgetown. He was involved in the Jesuit theater with the Hillary Clinton emails. I was not sure if you're aware of that Jesuit theater. I'm just going through some of the comments here, George. But yeah, jump in. I'll keep my mic muted while the alarm is going off.
Okay, so anyhow, so one of the things you said earlier, and I didn't quite jump on, is I wasn't aware that overnight or recently they passed an extension of the so-called Patriot Act, which basically neutralizes the U.S. Constitution. So maybe that was one of the purposes for this whole impeachment hearing, is to provide cover for what they're actually planning on for what they're actually doing. And so people will be so distracted. I mean, it's just like, I brought this up before. It's easy to distract with people with the ridiculous and stupid. For example, something I brought up before, there's a whole Colin Kaepernick or whatever his name is, the whole kneeling flap. Something you've mentioned on one of your videos last year is that Kaepernick's attorney, his agent, who is an attorney, Greg Gallegos, got his law degree from Georgetown. I'm sorry, from Loyola, Los Angeles, Loyola Marymount, Los Angeles. So you had millions, tens of millions of Americans all up in arm over what Kaepernick did and what other athletes, mostly on NFL teams, did for not standing or for the national anthem or taking a knee. And it was all stupid. It's just a complete, had absolutely nothing to do with anything. And, well, the whole rationale for Kaepernick for doing this was to bring attention to uh, police brutality, the violence that cops inflict on black people in big cities. Well, how is that going to, how is whether he stands or kneels for the national anthem, how is that going to bring attention to this situation?
No, I agree. It was all an emotional psyop because it's a very divisive, and you can see videos of like, ex, soldiers and veterans like burning Kaepernick's jersey, calling him like essentially like a heretic. How dare he disrespect, like the United States, or how dare he disrespect our veterans like that. So it's a very polarizing, divisive issue. Because again, Kaepernick, it's polarizing on the other side too, because it gets people just yelling and hooraying about police brutality, but Kaepernick's not giving people any scholarly facts and foundations of research to go on. He's just kind of just like Trump declaring, "Oh, it's the fake news media," just all surface level stuff. And I think, and actually, he's in the news. He actually may come back into the NFL sometime soon. And you're right. His attorney, Mark Geragos, went to Jesuit Loyola Marymount. He was the lawyer on CNN during the whole Trayvon Martin incident, which was a very controlled and manipulated event, in and itself. Zimmerman was a devout Catholic, an altar boy, and Trayvon Martin's dad was made a 33-degree Master Mason right after the shooting. So ultimately, it's all Jesuit theater. It's all to manipulate people's emotions. That's what the Kaepernick.
Okay, so one of the recent victims, or semi-recent victims of police brutality, was Michael Brown of Ferguson, New Jersey. This is 4 or 5 years ago. Well, anyhow, the district attorney of St. Louis County, Missouri, I believe that's where St. Louis is, at the time was Robert McCullough. He got his law degree from the University of St. Louis. And of course, you had Michael Ferguson, and you had the Johnny Gray killing in Baltimore around the same time, like 2012, 2013. And the district attorney there, I don't recall her name, but I believe she went to Boston College for her undergrad degree. So the Jesuits are behind the agitation. The Jesuits decry police brutality, but they also encourage it. Something we were talking about earlier, and I've mentioned this before, is the Federalist Society. The Jesuits run it. They're supposed to be the conservative right-wingers, but they also run the U.S. Constitutionalist Party. It was supposed to be left-wing, liberal. It was founded, the Constitutionalist Society was founded by Peter Rubin, who got his law degree or undergrad degree from Georgetown. And most of your hardcore leftist judges and attorneys in the U.S. are part of it, on Supreme Court all the way down to local level. And these two organizations, almost all of your judges, your district attorneys, state attorney generals, are members of one or the other. They control both sides. Something you've said before is in the United States, they run the Republicans and the Democrats. In the UK, they run Labour and Conservatives. And I'm sure that they run all the major parties up in Canada, the Conservatives or whatever. And I believe you've actually done a video on that before. So they run the political parties, they run the legal societies, they run the press, they run intelligence, they run banking. They basically run everything. And they run the polar opposites to help create your Hegelian dialectic. I mean, you were talking about John F. Kennedy earlier. We were talking about John. We were talking. Hello.
Oh,
We
yeah.
were talking.
Oh, yeah, I'm here. I'm just
Okay.
yeah, the alarm's still going on, but yeah, keep going, George.
Oh, okay. So and something people forget is Lyndon Johnson went to Georgetown Law for a year, so he was at least partially trained by the Jesuits.
Yeah, he had a Catholic priest in Stonewall, Texas, as his quote spiritual advisor, Father Wunibald Schneider. And and this is in the post I did. Joseph Califano, Jesuit trained at Holy Cross in Brooklyn Prep, one of Johnson's key White House advisors. He said that like he was honestly like shocked at how often he would see Lyndon Johnson go to Catholic mass. And, Johnson had his own like special monks for him, like at the St. Dominic's Church in Washington. Whenever there was an issue, Johnson would go to the Catholic Church to get anything sorted out. So they're really interesting excerpts. And just a correction I need to make. Peter Stork, the FBI agent involved in the Hillary Clinton email Jesuit theater, it's his brother that's a Jesuit priest, not his dad. And Stork went to Georgetown. And ultimately, like all this is theater to get. Like, there's no media coverage. Like recently, like, there was a bill in Canada, Bill C-46, passed by Jesuit-trained Trudeau's Liberals, where like now the police in Canada can like arrest you for any reason, or pull you over for any reason whatsoever. Probable cause is now gone in Canada, and they can force you to take a breathalyzer with no probable cause. And that was passed by the quote-unquote liberal, Jesuit-trained devout Catholic Justin Trudeau. And, there's no media coverage about it. Larry Cohen mentioned here in the chat, he brought this up to me in a comment on a previous video. There was a bill recently passed in Monroe County, Bill 1710, which made it a crime to disrespect or insult a police officer. For instance. Just like it was in, Nazi Germany. If you talk bad to the SS or the SAs, you're locked up. But these types of laws are being passed here, and all of this, like, the Kaepernick incident, the impeachment hearings, like there's so much, theater going on, RussiaGate. There's so much, Jesuit theater going on in the mainstream that's just getting people thinking into their emotions that they're completely overlooking these bills being passed, and the media is covering up all this stuff too. Like Barack Obama and his executive order 13603 legalized slave labor in the United States. He actually did that. Barack Obama in Section 502, he said that if the U.S. government or like any of the aforementioned secretary heads, he lists like 12 of the departments. If they can actually force someone to work for the U.S. government without compensation. And that was passed in this executive order. And this executive order was it's an executive order beefing up the Defense Production Act of 1950, which that act, gives the president of the United States like full control of the entire U.S. economy. It's essentially like the same type of legislation as Roosevelt's Emergency Banking Act, which put the U.S. into a perpetual state of national emergency. But I recommend people read that executive. I think it was called National Defense Resource Preparedness. Executive Order 1363 by Barack Obama. Absolutely zero media coverage about it. And like he actually, and like the president of the United States and like the U.S. government has like full powers to take over anyone's business, to confiscate anyone's property in emergency and peacetime. They added the word peacetime into this executive order, and Trump, will not repealed it and has not repealed it. For instance, so like that ultimately, so like that's what this stuff is ultimately also all about, like the impeachment hearings and all the other circus shows we're seeing, like Hillary's emails, like they're getting people like sheepishly thinking that oh, Trump's going to bring Hillary in and arrest her for these emails. Like Trump's older sister Marianne Trump Barry, we mentioned, gave $4 million to Jesuit Fairfield. She's a federal judge. She was appointed by Jesuit-trained Bill Clinton, Hillary's husband, as a judge. You think Trump's going to go after Hillary? Like, Trump plays golf with Bill Clinton. So all these psyops are designed to just gaslight people's emotions, and to cover up the real stuff that's going on, like with relations to the government.
And of course, thing is, ever since Donald Trump became president, almost 3 years ago, every day they say, "Oh yes, we have the goods on Donald Trump that he'll be impeached and removed." We have evidence that he colluded with Russia, and we'll have the Mueller investigation. Then we'll have Robert Mueller testify before Congress, and all those sideshows didn't materialize. Now we have Ukraine Gate, and we know that Donald Trump used the power of the presidency to get dirt on Joe Biden and his son Hunter, and now they have these hearings. So all these things are just meant to distract, entertain, and aggravate. Because if you're on the right, that once again Donald Trump was vindicated. If you're on the left, you're angry that Donald Trump is going to get away with something else. So it's just like, well, as I said earlier, professional wrestling. Whether Donald Trump is a heel or a face, if you love him, you love him if he's a face, and if you hate him if he's a heel. But I mean, he's friends. Someone we just discussed. He's personal friends with Vince McMahon, who runs professional wrestling. McMahon's wife, I forgot her name. She is actually part of the Trump administration. So yes, we have a WWE president, and of course, people like Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi. They're also professional wrestlers.
Yeah, let me see if I can find the source here. You sent me this, George. Just let me pull this up here. Schiff, actually, you found the source where Schiff was speaking at Jesuit Loyola University. Let me pull that up here. Yeah, this is
Chicago. Yes.
Yeah, he was speaking there with Mike Quigley. You can see my photo here on my screen. U.S. Representative Schiff and Quigley speak at Jesuit Loyola. You can see Loyola, Ad Morgium Del Gloriam, the motto of the Jesuits, right there behind Adam Schiff. This is also the motto of 32nd degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. But Schiff is completely controlled by the Jesuits. We can get to it. Hopefully this alarm goes off here. But I wanted to share some of this video here of Mike Quigley questioning Ambassador Yovanovitch, because he mentions how this is all basically a reality TV show. Mike Quigley says this. Mike Quigley would know that it's all Jesuit theater because he went to Jesuit Loyola, and like you said, possibly could be a descendant of the Archbishop James Edward Quigley, who actually declared in 1903 that the Catholic Church will rule the world when the United States rules the world. And that was quoted in the Chicago Tribune. And I had that sourced on my blog. So, how's the volume? Is it loud in the background, George? Maybe I'll wait to see if this stops.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me good? Yeah, yes. I was wondering if I should wait before this alarm stops. It's only a 1 or 2 minute clip of Quigley questioning Yovanovitch. I wanted to play.
I think it'd be a good idea to play it because I do need to be going myself.
Okay, I'll play it here. Yeah, pardon everyone. Unfortunately, I live in an apartment building with some younger university students who don't know how to cook. And this is a consequence of that. The alarm goes off every now and then. But I'll share my screen here. Okay, here's the testimony from, and this is Jesuit-trained Mike Quigley, quote-unquote, questioning Jesuit-trained Ambassador Yovanovitch.
I'm Ambassador. It's like a Hallmark movie. You ended up at Georgetown. This is
See, it's a Hallmark movie. You ended up at Georgetown.
all okay.
It's all okay. And then she smirks. Okay, great. So it sounds like the alarm just went off. I'll play it from the start here.
Madam Ambassador. It's like a Hallmark movie. You ended up at Georgetown. This is all okay.
And then she smirks. She knows the Jesuit theater. Then they all laugh.
But it wasn't your preference 7, 8 months ago, correct?
No, it was not.
Wasn't your preference to be the victim of a smear campaign, was it?
No.
Wasn't your preference to be defamed by the President of the United States, including today, was it?
No.
Wasn't your preference to be ousted at seemingly the pinnacle of your career, was it?
No.
You wanted to finish your extended tour, correct?
I did.
What did you want to do after that? Did you know?
I wasn't sure.
There's nothing wrong with Georgetown. It's a fine place, right?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with Georgetown. It's a fine place, right? Actually, Georgetown was brought up like 15 times like this during this one day of questioning of this
It's
ambassador.
your only choice at the end of a distinguished career after all that. It's not the end of a Hallmark movie. It's the end of a really bad reality TV show.
Oh, it's the AKA Jesuit theater.
It's the end of a really bad reality TV show brought to you by someone who knows a lot about that.
Referring to the president, he's basically saying what we just said. Like our current president's a Jesuit-trained reality TV star, acting as president. He's basically admitting to this here that it's all Jesuit theater.
Brought to you by someone who knows a lot about that.
You know, and she smirks right at
Why
her.
did you
I'll leave it there. If you haven't heard that, this is all in the. I linked the Washington Post article where you can read the whole, like the entire disposition. Disposition. If I'm saying that right. But the Georgetown University is brought up 15 times. The Senator Conaway brings it up. Stefanik brings it up. Quigley brings it up, and there's one other senator that brings it up. Like it's so like in plain sight that this is all Jesuit theater. And there's one a commenter wanted me to bring up how some Jesuit connections to transgenders. Let me read the stream here. She's secretly a guy. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. The hidden hand. I don't know. I'll have to look into. I haven't done a quote unquote trans investigation of Ambassador Yovanovitch. You might find this story interesting here, George. Just I think I sent this story a month or two ago to the team, but the headline was, I'm screen sharing now, Jennifer Pritzker to donate $10 million to Loyola. Jennifer Pritzker is a Jesuit-trained billionaire Chicago philanthropist and real estate developer. Her and her foundation plan to give $10 million to Jesuit Loyola University in Chicago. You see Pritzker, there's a photo of her here, who publicly identified as transgender in 2013, took a break from active duty in the Army to attend Loyola, Jesuit Loyola, and later joined the Illinois Army National Guard, retiring in 2001 with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel and the Honorary National Guard promotion to full Colonel. That's probably the Jesuits pulling some strings there. She also founded the Taiwanese Enterprises, which invests and restores properties in the Chicago area, including the city's north side and in Evanston. So this is just interesting connection to the Jesuits and transgender billionaire philanthropists. Is this Jennifer Pritzker? Yeah, I don't know if you saw that, George. It's kind of interesting. But a commenter wanted us to talk a bit about some transgender connections with the Jesuits. And I know you sent me some like wiki pages. You found lots of people involved in the LGBT movement, and even actually, I'm pretty sure you found some transgender rights activists also, connected to SJ schools. And it seems to
I'm drawing a blank. I don't.
Especially sorry, what are you saying, George?
Okay, I sent out so much stuff. Yes, I think I sent you something a while back, but could you refresh my memory?
Yeah, let me see if I can find I think you might have titled it LGBT. And especially with Pope Francis currently in the White House right now, or the White House, sorry, in the Jesuit Pope Francis being Pope, like the Vatican endorsing the LGBT agenda has gone into hyperdrive, like literally hyperdrive. Like they're flying like the rainbow flags at the Vatican now, which you wouldn't have. That would not have happened, in 1970, for instance. Let me see if I can find the email you sent, because I know you found some leaders who are connected to the LGBT movement. Elizabeth Birch. Okay, right here's one of them. Okay, Elizabeth A. Birch, an American attorney, former corporate executive. You sent me this in April. Elizabeth A. Birch, American attorney, former corporate executive, who chaired the board of directors of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force from 1992 to 1994. And Elizabeth A. Birch served as the executive director of the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBT organization, from 1995 to 2004. Father was Canadian Air Force. She was born at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. She went to University of Hawaii and Jesuit Santa Clara University of Law. Interestingly, I'm sure. And you sent me others, but that's just an example of it. Like if you look into who are some of the biggest advocates of this, like LGBT transgender wave, a lot of the advocates, connect back to SJ schools.
Okay, I'm looking her up, and of course, you're talking about the wife of okay, I'm looking at Birch right now.
No, she's in Superior, especially from like 1992 to 2004. She was the biggest voice in the gay rights movement. She openly went to Jesuit Santa Clara University.
Okay, yes, and of course there's well, I think we talked about this before, maybe one or two shows ago.
That's you, George. Just really quick before you get to that, do you remember, or have you seen the document, The Gay Revolutionary? I'm going to reprint this because Fordham University has this reposted on their website. Pardon my language. I guess with these new latest YouTube regulations, my videos aren't for kids, but I guess I can say, shit you not. I shit you not. Jesuit Georgetown University is reprinting this story called, there's an essay written by a Michael Swift called The Gay Revolutionary. And it says it's from the Gay Community News, February 15th to 21st, 1987, reprinted from the Congressional Record with the preface restored. I'll just read some of it because, like, George, the Jesuits are you kidding me? They're reprinting this essay on their website. Are you kidding me? This is a war being declared on straight people. Like, I'll just read some of it. So that's how the essay starts. We shall sodomize your sons. Emblems of, actually, I'm going to prove that I'm sure I'm not making this up. And we'll wrap this up here shortly, George. We're over the 2-hour mark. I know you mentioned you had to get going.
Okay, can I just
Here's the
repeat something? Okay. Last month, the National League Washington Nationals won their first World Series. They are the current incarnation of the old Monterey Expos. They're the Expos from 1969 to 2004, and they've been the U.S. Capitals since 2005. So they defeated the Nationals defeated the American League Houston Astros. So something I mentioned before, and I know we talked about this a couple weeks ago, is in recent years it's been de rigueur that when a U.S. national sports team wins its championship, the Super Bowl, World Series, whatever, the team will go to the White House and meet with the president. And there's at least one member of the Nationals, Sean Doolittle, who is a relative of Jimmy Doolittle, the Tokyo Raider back in World War II, who decided not to go because he says he does not like Donald Trump. He doesn't like his policies. He doesn't like him personally. and blah blah blah. Well, anyhow, Sean Doolittle, who was born in 1986, has been pitching the majors since 2012. He originally broke in with the American League Oakland Athletics. Well, Doolittle's wife is named Ariane Dolan. Dolan, as you might glean, is Irish Roman Catholic, and Ariane was triple dipped, or at least double dipped. Pulling this up right now. So she, okay, so Doolittle decided not to meet with the president. And when he was with Oakland, when he was pitching with the A's in Oakland, he his wife Behest, who worked with the A's in the community, they hosted the first Pride Night of the Coliseum in 2015, and so anyhow, but Ariane, as I said before, here it is. Okay. Ariane went to the Catholic Institute in Paris, France, Institut Catholique de Paris, for 3 years. But she got her degree from the University of San Diego, which is Catholic. And she has a master's degree from Fordham. So I know I mentioned this on the show before. So
yeah, George, is she big into is Doolittle's Jesuit educated wife big in the LGBT transgender
yes
community?
Yes,
she's big into that.
Very much so. And of course, the first open homosexual politician was Harvey Milk. He was elected to the in the U.S. at least. He was elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in 1977, and he served in that position until the following year when Dan White, Roman Catholic, allegedly killed him, and George Moscone. Somebody killed Harvey Milk and George Moscone. I'm not sure if it were Dan White. So almost all the players, we don't have time to go in this. Maybe we can do this in the next broadcast, but this marks the 27th, marks the 41st anniversary of the assassination of Harvey Milk and George Moscone.
Yeah, we should go in there because that all ties into Jonestown very intimately as well.
Well, and of course, something people don't appreciate this. People were talking about this non-scandal in Ukraine and the non-scandal in Russia collusion last few years. Well, that should have been a major scandal, because Jim Jones in the 1970s was a major power broker, a kingmaker in California politics for Democrats. He was instrumental in getting several politicians. He and his organization, People Simple, was instrumental in getting several prominent politicians elected or reelected.
George, just really cool. I know Jones. I know you commented on one of my videos. That Charles Chinnicky wrote that the Jesuits had controlled San Francisco since 1850, and how did Jones became the chairman of the San Francisco Housing Authority? Like what? How does that happen? Like this guy's like a madman. That only in Jesuit San Francisco, I guess, or only in a political culture that the Jesuits completely control, where they allow this like maniac to become like the head of the housing authority. And it just the dysfunction, I guess, just has translated perfectly well to the today, George, just because San Francisco is the most expensive place to live in America. Here, jump back in there.
Well, but speaking of which, these episodes served as launching pads for two politicians. Dianne Feinstein at the time was on the board of directors of the board of supervisors for San Francisco, and she was planning on retiring in 1979. So after the death of Moscone, she became acting mayor of San Francisco, then mayor. She was elected, I believe, in 1980 and held that post until 88. So basically almost the entire 1980s. Then she eventually became a senator. She ran for governor in 1990, didn't get that gig, but became a senator in 1993. Now, Feinstein is perfect. Her dad was Jewish, Russian Jewish, or rather German Jewish, and her mom was Russian Orthodox. But she went to a Catholic school, Sacred Heart Seminary or Sacred Heart Convent. So she was your Feinstein is a papal court public Jew who was trained by the Catholics. So she was perfectly qualified to be mayor and later senator. Um, Also, one of the congressional aides for Leo Ryan, who went down to Jonestown and was killed, was a young Jackie Spear. And that served. This tragedy also served as
Yeah, Roman Catholic, right?
well, actually, no. She went to a Catholic school, Mercy High School in San Mateo, California, which is just south of San Francisco. Now, her mom was Armenian Eastern Orthodox, and her dad was German Lutheran, but she is trained by Rome. So they
Okay,
have.
I was gonna say, because she came out and said that no, the CIA had nothing to do with Jonestown, kind of
Yes.
pathetically and sheepishly. But so I guess that just shows she has handlers.
Yes. So she got involved in now Spear is your more typical politician. She did work her way up the ranks. She was as I said, San Mateo is just south of San Francisco. She was on the board of supervisors there in the 80s. She became a California legislature. Then she became a U.S. Congresswoman. So even though she is a puppet, she does have, she did have to work her way through the ranks. But as I said, it's always helpful going to a Catholic high school. That gives you your foot in the door.
Well, I know the current mayor of Washington. I think she is Catholic. And Bowser.
Yeah.
And she went to Catholic school. I presume she's Catholic, but she's very young. Almost like no political experience, but she gets that mayor of Washington position. It helps to be Catholic. That's for sure. The first mayor of Washington, going way back in American history, Robert Brent, was the nephew of Jesuit priest John Carroll, S.J., who founded John Carroll founded Georgetown, which is located in Washington, D.C., if people aren't aware, but then like 2 or 3 miles of the White House. And from day one in 1789, that Georgetown has been the Jesuit strategic outpost in America. Mm-hmm. And the White House is essentially controlled by proxy by Georgetown. That's why if you read the transcript I linked, and you saw it in the Quigley video, Jesuit trained Mike Quigley questioning Jesuit trained Maria Yovanovitch. That's why they were sucking up to Georgetown so much in these impeachment hearings, kind of letting it out into the open covertly for those who have the eyes to see who's in control.
And one of the things that I'm sorry, I haven't eaten. I was just having okay. The one of the things that Quigley said, at least not Quigley. Sabonik said in her testimony, I heard this on the radio, is when she was talking to Yanovich, she said, "Well, it's unfortunate that you had this bad thing happen to you. You're no longer ambassador to Ukraine, and Donald Trump was being mean, and shame on Donald Trump, and he should go to bed without his dinner." But one of the things that Sabonik said, I heard as I said on the radio, is, well, if, Ukraine's loss is Georgetown's gain, or she said that I'm sure you'll be a true asset to Georgetown, and I'm sure she will be. So.
It's amazing that they just let that out. I guess the Jesuits. I guess this is just a reality. Averman Hatton even wrote about this way back in the 50s in Catholic Imperialism and World Freedom. I think the Jesuits are so confident in how dumbed down the American populace is that they can let out these subtleties, about Georgetown and stuff. Can feel completely safe at these hearings. Because 99.9% of America doesn't even know what to look for.
Well, and of course, when you say Georgetown, they say, "Oh, that must be a school in D.C.," and they'll just leave it at that. It's probably named after George Washington. But you also have George Washington University in D.C., which they run, which is supposed to be a secular institution. But that's another show altogether. So Rome runs. So just in case people forget, Rome runs. You said this secular institutions, and they play all sorts of games. Johnny has brought this up before. It's confusing between. People have a hard time differentiating between Boston College and Boston University. Well, Boston College is the openly Jesuit school, and Boston College is a secretly Jesuit school. But and they hide behind secular names.
St. George, because there's a Newman Center at secular Boston University.
Well, of course there is. Would you expect anything? But you see, they all the schools in the Boston, Mass area have a matriculation agreement, which goes back to the 1980s. That if you're accepted into one school, that's good. All the others. So if you're accepted into Boston University, you'll be accepted into Boston College or to Brandeis or whatever the other schools are there. So yes, they run.
The Holy Cross is close by, isn't it? Like the Jesuits have 2 schools in Massachusetts.
Yes.
And actually, it's a great. This going back to, I think again, this was Eric John Phelps mentioned in his Jesuit banking video, but Fairfield, I believe it was. This is Fairfield. This is a little farther south in Connecticut. I thought it was the Holy Cross, but it was Fairfield. But he mentions how the Federal Reserve Bank of New York covers districts where there's Jesuit schools located in every district, like Buffalo, where there's Jesuit Canisius College. There's a Federal Reserve Bank of New York post in Buffalo. Then there's the Federal Reserve Bank of New York post in Fairfield, Connecticut, where there's Jesuit Fairfield University. And just, going to all the Jesuit schools, like there's a Federal Reserve Bank in Boston, where there's Jesuit Boston College. Federal Reserve Bank in New York, you got Fordham. Fed Bank in Cleveland, you got St. Ignatius Prep in Cleveland. Fed Bank in Dallas, you got Jesuit Dallas Prep in Dallas. There's a Fed Bank in Atlanta, you got Jesuit Cristo Rey College in Atlanta. There's a Federal Reserve Bank in Kansas City, I believe. And there's Jesuit Rockhurst right there in Kansas City. I believe there's a LA Federal Reserve Bank also, I'm pretty sure. And that's Loyola Marymount. So if you go through all the 12 Federal Reserve Bank locations, like where are they geographically located? There's actually Jesuit schools nearby to all 12 Federal Reserve banks, which people aren't aware. Just further proof that they're in full control. But just going back to your original point, it's a great point. Like, I think at this point, if you see a Boston University or Boston College, like they're both, I would say, completely controlled by Rome at this point. Boston College is just openly Jesuit, like they're more open with it. With Boston College, the chief of marketing at Apple, Phil Schiller, gave $25 million to Jesuit Boston College in 2018, and he went to Jesuit Boston College. So, the money stays in house. Like Harvard gets massive donations too. MIT, all these, like aristocratic, like Ivy League, secular schools. They get big donations too. Like the money stays in house. Like the Harvard endowment, is bigger than like many African countries' GDPs. For instance. And Jesuit Boston College has one of the biggest college endowments in America. Many of the Jesuit schools actually do. That's the biggest endowment programs. But at this point, it's completely controlled. Well, and I can just say that, like, at no point was I ever recommended one. Like, I went to a secular school here at Brock University. At no point was I ever recommended any book to read that had any remote, tie to the Vatican or Vatican intrigue. Like, it wasn't brought up in one class I ever took, even the history classes I took. Like, absolutely zero on the Vatican. Could have mentioned how, during World War I, the Kaiser Wilhelm II said in his memoirs, in his official memoirs, that the Pope told him, Pope Leo XIII, that Germany was become the sword of the Catholic Church. You think quotes like that would be important to tell like the history students of future generations. But I wasn't exposed to all of that, or I wasn't exposed to any of that. I had to search it out on my own. You think if there actually was like a true, like if the United States was like a truly like Protestant country with like a good foundational Protestant rock in the education system, that they'd be teaching historical facts about the papacy. But none of them do it. And there's 2,000 Newman centers, all over America, like we mentioned, at secular schools. Like here in Toronto, like I right across the street from the University of Toronto Library, there's the Newman Center right there, right in downtown Toronto. It's a huge complex, the Newman Center, and it's right on campus too.
Well,
but do you want to? You want to wrap, or do you have anything you want to wrap up with here, George, before we sign off?
Well, it's just well, I know we can go on for hours, but we'll have to do this again soon. And as you said, Friday marked the 56th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and who officially was the only Catholic president the United States has ever had, officially. But another question is how many unofficial, how many closeted Catholic presidents has my country had?
I would say almost over 40. Over 40.
Well, there may have been one or two who did resist.
I'd say Lincoln was actually, interesting. Lincoln never went to Jesuit Georgetown University. That was interesting.
Okay, so
interestingly with Lincoln, the Roman Catholic Chief Justice Taney, who made the devout Catholic who judged the disastrous Dred Scott case, which extended slavery, into the United States. The Jesuits are, believe in the profiting of human trafficking, but that's a different discussion altogether. But Chief Justice Taney, before he was Chief Justice, he was cheering on Andrew Jackson when he declared New Orleans in a state of martial law. But when Abraham Lincoln did it, and the reason Abraham Lincoln declared martial law is because the Catholic Confederate terrorists were actually trying to destroy Lincoln's government. There were actual subversive plots, going and taking place. But the Catholic Justice Taney, all of a sudden, he's like, "Oh, Lincoln, you can't do this. Why you can't suspend habeas corpus? You can't do it when you're doing it against Catholics." But he had no problem when Andrew Jackson did it. So it's interesting that this Catholic Chief Justice Taney completely flip-flopped on the issue of martial law when it came to serving Rome's political interests, which I guess is predictable as a Catholic judge. But but just before Lincoln went to Georgetown, I found this I found a book written in 1890. It's on my archive.org page. It was called a history composing Georgetown College, written in 1890. But from day one, it was a tradition for American presidents to speak at the inauguration service at Georgetown, going all the way back to Washington. John Adams even spoke at Georgetown. Jefferson even spoke at Georgetown. Adams and Jefferson. I have the letter on my blog. In 1816, John Adams wrote to Jefferson, warning him of Jesuit influence in America. But all of them spoke at Georgetown. James Buchanan, Pierce, James Polk. James Polk, a Scottish Rite Mason, his son went to Georgetown. President John Tyler's son, Tazewell Tyler, went to Georgetown. So many American presidents from there's probably 6 or 7 American presidents who have sent their kids to Georgetown just from the founding of America up to 1890. So just reading that official Georgetown history book, I got a sense of how intimately connected Georgetown has been to American politics. Day one. The seal of Georgetown University is identical to the seal of the United States. It's the exact same symbol. And in Appleton's encyclopedia was quote. I have the quote on my blog in 1887. Appleton's encyclopedia said there was no greater power in America at the time of the Revolution than the union of the Jesuits in Maryland in the person of John Carroll. I'm paraphrasing, but that's on my blog. read that quote out on previous videos. For instance, like there's been Jesuit priests like related to presidents of the United States, like William Howard Taft, Skull and Bonesman. He had a younger descendant who became a powerful Jesuit, Robert Francis Taft, who was an expert in Russian and Middle East politics. He was stationed in Iraq. And President James Monroe had a younger nephew who became a Jesuit, Andrew Francis Monroe, S.J. Like when I was reading the memoirs of Jesuit Pierre Jean de Smet, like the Jesuit of the West, like he was in the 1860s, he was big on Western exploration. He was an official chaplain to the United States Army, Jesuit Pierre de Smet, routinely writing back and forth to Army generals and commanders at this time in the 1860s. So like they've had an intimate relationship. Like in 1830, Charles Constantine Pies, S.J., was a chaplain to the United States Senate, and he was a Jesuit. So like there was a Jesuit chaplain in the U.S. Senate all the way back in 1830. And still to this day, that's the only time a Catholic priest has been a chaplain in the Senate. So they have a long, history of intrigue and influence in the U.S. The Chief Justice who signed off on the Federal Reserve Act and the 16th Amendment, Edward Douglas White, educated at 2 Jesuit schools. He was the Chief Justice at the time, and all the way back in 1911. From like almost day one, at least you could say definitively, George, since Woodrow Wilson, every U.S. president has had like a Jesuit-trained advisor in the White House, like every single one. Wilson's Joseph Patrick Tumulty went to Jesuit St. Peter's, and I think I haven't seen an official source on this, but apparently some Catholic sites claim that when President Pierce was in office all the way back in 1851, that he was in dialogue with the Pope, and even visited the Pope, I think, while he was in Europe.
Well, for what it's worth,
and I know you mentioned before, George, that Ulysses Grant went to see the Pope on his world tour in the late 1800s, and Ulysses Grant fundamentally changed the structure of the United States. He actually turned the U.S. into a corporation after the duration of the Civil War ended with the Organic Act of 1871. Ulysses Grant was also an honorary member of the Jesuit Philodemic Society at Georgetown, and he toured. Yeah, I think it was Pope Leo XIII he saw when he did his grand tour. So there's an occulted history of Jesuit influence in the United States. Let me see. Actually, I'll share my screen here. I found a stamp that Benjamin Franklin wrote in 1776. And Benjamin Franklin actually, he kind of incorporates. I don't know if you saw this stamp here, George. He kind of incorporates the Jesuit sunburst into the stamp, and in the center of it, it says "We are one American Congress." And I'll just show you how it's kind of ties to the Jesuit logo here. So here it is here, Benjamin Franklin's stamp. You can see in all the colony, the 13 colonies are on the inner rings connecting. But it's kind of, I saw the Jesuit pattern because of the alternating nature of so you see it's a straight line and then a triangle alternating around the central sun figure. And that's how the Jesuit logo actually works. It's a small triangle alternating with the squiggly triangle around the center. And Franklin was lifelong friends with the Jesuit John Carroll, S.J., lifelong friends. Franklin toured they went on the mission to Quebec together in 1775 to get support of the French Roman Catholics for the cause of the Revolution. Benjamin Franklin got Roman Catholic Spain to aid the American Revolutionary Army, and a lot of the financial help from Catholic Spain came through the Catholic Gardaquis banking house. And Diego de Gardaquis was the first ambassador stationed in the United States who laid down the cornerstone of the St. Peter's Cathedral in New York City, the first Catholic church in New York City.
Oh, okay. Well, Franklin Pierce.
The point being, there's an occulted history, and that's why, for instance, the U.S. Treasury Building is modeled off of Roman Athenaeum, which was the title of a treasury building in the ancient Roman Empire. That's why the Treasury Building is modeled off a treasury building in the Roman Empire, for instance. Like,
Okay.
Johnny's like the Catholic Encyclopedia even admits this. I covered this in the article I did on Robert Brent. Tupper Saucy also exposes this in his book, The Rulers of Evil. But on the New Advent Encyclopedia, on the entry on Washington, it actually says that in 1689, the area now known as Washington was called Rome on the Potomac.
Okay, if I could just,
you said jump in there.
Eric, can I just mention a couple of things? I do have to be going. I need to be done probably no later than 1 p.m. Eastern, so about 15 minutes. You mentioned Franklin Pierce. He was the first U.S. president to actually put up a Christmas tree in the White House. Would have been like 1851, 52, and I know this is a different topic altogether and touchy. And this is apropos as Christmas is coming up in just over a month, December the 25th. Christmas was officially illegal in the United States until the year 1820. So for the first 40 plus years of our existence, people could not celebrate it. Even though it did become legal in 1820, most people did not observe it because most people were still Protestants. You didn't start.
Yeah, I was gonna say because like at this point, in the way like the Catholic Church didn't have many numbers. Like the key Catholics they had were influential in certain government posts and like landowners and aristocrats. But in terms of like the populace, like I want to say it was still like the population of the United States was still like 85%, Protestant at this time.
Probably
maybe more, 90%, 95% amongst the masses.
Okay, so you didn't start seeing a huge demographic change until like 1830, 1840, when you started having large numbers of Catholic immigrants coming over from Europe, Italy, Southern Germany, or what would become Southern Germany, the Irish Republic. And as I said, Pierce was the first U.S. president to have the tree in the White House. And Christmas did not become a federal U.S. holiday until the year 1870. So almost overnight, it had gone from being illegal to being fully embraced. And there's always, because most of the colonists, as I said, before America became a country, were Protestants, and the majority of them were Puritans, and they knew their history, they knew their Bible. It was actually Cromwell outlawed Christmas when he was Lord Protector back in the 1850s or whatever his dates were. So even though Christmas became legal again in England, most English people did not observe it. And the same thing in America or the American colonies and what would become the United States. And as I said, it became a federal holiday in 1870. Now, a major part of this was a work by Charles Dickens called A Christmas Carol, which came out, I believe, in the 1840s. His job was to basically convert Protestants into accepting Christmas, first in England, then in the United States. So you had the change in demographics in America in the 19th century, where you had huge numbers of Catholics coming over who brought their Christmas tradition with them.
Yeah, I was saying this is subliminal too, because people are like Christmas. It dates back to the Roman Empire, which the Catholic Church today considers the Holy Roman Empire, the extension of the deceased old Roman Empire. But that's where Christmas, or I guess it was called Saturnalia.
Yes.
It's a distinct, I guess, Roman tradition, if you will.
And of course, so nowadays, most professed Protestants in America, Britain, or wherever have no qualms whatsoever making a big deal on December the 25th or December the 24th, Christmas Eve. They'll have celebrations, they'll put up the trees and do the presents. And I just want to say, there's three issues here, specifically in America because of our Constitution, First Amendment. One, if individuals want to celebrate it or families. Two, churches. Three, the government. My recommendation for all three is they don't. But specifically, technically speaking, now Christmas is on a Wednesday this year, so it is a weekday. But almost all government offices, post offices, libraries, and so forth will be closed. Schools, even though the U.S. government is supposed to be secular, religiously neutral. Now, if people want to take that day off from work They should ask their employer, say, "Hey, could I get the day off?" Or if they're self-employed, just take off. The government should not have any involvement with it whatsoever. That is a clear usurpation of the First Amendment, and most people don't seem to realize this.
Well, I mean, to your point, that there's been so many systematic violations where like it's again almost like people don't even like know what's in the First Amendment anymore. President Lyndon Johnson, Jesuit trained Lyndon Johnson, passing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, blatantly violated the Constitution, where it says the government cannot respect like a particular religion when it comes to like making a law, and like that the essentially like the U.S. Constitution was designed for there to be no influence of religion in politics. If you take what the documents say on their surface level or surface value, and it's amazing that in a so-called country like the United States that has a separation of church and state, where the Catholic Church has an archdiocese for the military services, where the U.S. taxpayers are actually paying to have Catholic chapels and Catholic Catholic religious service installations being set up at all the U.S. Army bases all over the world. It's a huge archdiocese. Like there's almost like every in the U.S. military is like an empire in itself. Asia Command, Europe Command, Southeast. They have a Southeast Asia Command, South America Command. Like all of these bases all over the world now have Catholic, religious worship, services being held at them. And Catholic structures are built on these U.S. government military bases. And the Catholic Church and the Archdiocese for the Military Service, admits on their own website that it's a special relationship with the U.S. government, where the chapels are officially on U.S. government property, meaning that U.S. taxpayers are paying for them. Which is an incredible fact that it shatters the idea that there's a separation of church and state. And Johnny's mentioned many times like the confessional laws in many states, like Louisiana and Massachusetts, for instance. There's many others, but the states the quote unquote sacredness of the confession is upheld in the civil courts, where Catholic bishops don't have to disclose information dealing with cases involving sexual assault of minors. So like if they hear in the confession that like a priest molested a little kid, they're under no obligation to tell the civil powers anything, because that would be violating the oath of the confession according to the secular government. So it shatters the idea that there's a separation of church and state. And the Roman fasces are on the United States tax court. They're on the National Sheriff's Association. They're on the United States Administrative Courts. The Roman fasces are on the U.S. Senate logo. There's Roman fasces in the House of Representatives. This is the symbol of fascism. The Roman fasces are just as prevalent in the United States as it was in Mussolini's Italy, where there is absolutely zero separation of church and state. Like Mussolini's Italy signed a concordat making Catholicism the official religion of Italy. And that's why the fasces were all over Italian government symbols. But they're just as prevalent on American government symbols as they were in Mussolini's fascist Italy. And I actually predicted the way things are going, the United States will sign a concordat with the Vatican, I think within like 20 years.
Well,
actually may even come sooner. They're going to sign a concordat with the Vatican and make Catholicism the official religion of the United States. Like I've read, there's a great website, Concordat Watch. I think concordatwatch.eu. That's a good website for concordat studies. But I did a blog post reprinting the concordat with the Dominican Republic. This was signed when a bloody, ruthless dictator, Rafael Trujillo, a good Catholic, but a monster dictator, was in charge of the Dominican Republic. The Catholic Church signed a concordat with them, and the Catholic Church is the absolute ruler of the Dominican Republic. Like all you got to do is read the concordat to see that. Like absolute ruler of the Dominican, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is in control of the military. They appoint who gets to be in charge of the secular military.
Well,
Dominican. So the Vatican wants all civil powers in the world to engage in these concordat agreements. So I think that's the next step for the United States, and they'll canonize John Surratt eventually, the Roman Catholic who assassinated President Lincoln. He'll be canonized, and we're just going to see like the further Romanization of America. The millions of Roman Catholic Latino illegals coming over the southern border. Like it's, we could even see what Sherman Skolnick predicted, where the Catholic Mexico is actually going to annex Southern California, Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, and they're going to reverse the treaty of the Mexican-American War. That could also happen too.
Well, somebody who's on the, I'm not sure if this has happened, but speaking of Stefanik, we've talked about this Congresswoman, Elise, but her possible relative, Aloysius Cardinal Stefanik, who was one of the architects of the Eustache massacre back in the 1940s. As I mentioned to you before, there is a school named after him. There's an Archbishop Stefanik High School in New York. Also, Stefanik was convicted of being a war criminal after World War II. He was sentenced to 15 years and he only served 5, so less than a third of the actual sentence. And in 2016, more than half a century after his death, his conviction was vacated, as I mentioned on a previous show. However, Stefanik was a personal friend of Spellman. So Spellman decided to have the school named after him in New York, even when Stefanik was still alive. They usually wait until you're dead to do that. And Stefanik has been beatified, so he's on the track to being declared a saint in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, Francis is seriously considering it. I think I may have misspoke. I think on a previous 2 or 3 streams ago, I said he had been canonized, but at this point, he's just been beatitized.
So that means
the process of canonization.
So I mean, there's different things they had to claim he did a miracle, when he's alive, miracle, at least one miracle when he died, and so. I was talking to a lay Catholic about him recently, last week, or actually this week at a local coffee shop. And I said, Steve, have you ever heard of Aloysius Cardinal Stefanik? I said, sorry, nope, I haven't. I said, have you ever heard of the Eustache? He said, nope, sorry, I haven't. So you have no idea who Ante Pavlovic was? Nope, sorry, don't. Next question. Oh, so I filled him in. And he said, well, where did you get your information? And I said, well, Wikipedia. Well, how do you know it wasn't written by one of his enemies? Now, Steve is a devout Roman Catholic. And,
but George, that's a good point. That's the mindset devout Catholics are in. Only like a true enemy or a subversive would dare criticize God's true church.
And of course, he was saying, so Steve was saying that, so why are you dredging up somebody who lived 60, 70 years ago, what it was, and these crimes in which he's involved or allegedly involved happened 75, 80 years ago? Why aren't you concentrating on now? What is going on in the world currently? And I try to be as diplomatic as possible. And I said, it's a cliche, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So you had to look to get an idea of what is going on in the world. You have to look in the past. You have to pay attention, look at what happened 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, to get an idea of what is going on now and what is probably going to happen in the future. Because the Jesuits are basically, how at the beginning of this broadcast, we were talking about how similar these impeachment hearings were to the Bill Clintons of the 1990s. Well, there's a reason for it. Because you had the same architects behind both of them.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's identical architects, the Jesuits. And as we mentioned, not a coincidence that Clinton's lawyer at that time literally had 3 Jesuit degrees. Mm-hmm. Robert Bennett. And this Robert S. Bennett, just go on his Wikipedia page and see who he's represented. He was the lawyer during the Valerie Plame circus, which according to Sherman Skolnick, it was actually the male prostitute Jeff Gannon who would regularly go to the White House to see George Bush, who obtained the information and leaked the info on Valerie Plame. as according to Sherman Skolnick. But Robert S. Bennett was a lawyer during all of this, because one of the supposed New York Times reporters that male prostitute Jeff Gannon reached out to was Judith Miller, who in Robert S. Bennett, the Jesuit lawyer, was Judith Miller's lawyer. And Judith Miller, who had Jesuit Robert Bennett as her lawyer, is coincidentally the same New York Times reporter that was putting out all the disinformation that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction through the New York Times back in the early 2000s. That's an interesting correlation. But this Robert S. Bennett, has a history, like a serious history of representing Jesuitical deep state interest. That's all on the Wikipedia page. So again, not a coincidence. He was the lawyer during the Watergate stuff, because that was all to, again, to gaslight the American people with a bunch of emotionalism and to mask like the real treason that was going on with Bill Clinton. For instance, the Waco massacre, the high treasonous weapons and technology transfers to communist China. For instance, there's a long list with Bill Clinton. Privatizing the prison, the Telecommunications Act, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and of course, you can just talk about what's going on right now. Rudy Giuliani and William Barr. William Barr's father, Donald, was the principal, or whatever they call it, the headmaster at the Dalton School, which hired Jeffrey Epstein back in the 1970s. Also, Giuliani was the mayor of New York City on 9/11. He also was a U.S. federal prosecutor who got several child molesters off. He actually got them completely off, acquitted, or he may have got them off in the other way. But he got them either...
probably a bit of both.
I'm sorry.
Giuliani, just people got to watch the video he did with Jesuit-trained Trump. There's some weird stuff going on with Rudy Giuliani.
Okay, so and Bill Barr, he was also involved with the Iran-Contra cover-up. So they like recycling these old players, Bill Barr, Bob Bennett. They said, "Hey, you were such a good air boy for us back then. Can you help us? Can you help us out now? And of course, for your faithful servants, we'll make you Attorney General, or we'll make you Speaker of the House, or we'll make you FBI director, or where the case may be."
George, with Jeff Epstein, Kathleen Hawks Sawyer, Jesuit trained, is making rounds again as the head of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. She was the head of the prisons when Bill Clinton was in office, I think from 92 to 2000, like almost the entire duration of Bill Clinton's presidency. And then right after Epstein died, Roman Catholic Bill Barr announces he's doing a shakeup at the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and that, lo and behold, Jesuit-trained Kathleen Hawks Sawyer is back in her second stint as the head of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Jesuit-trained at Welling Jesuit College.
Oh, okay, and of course, you could talk about, Bill Barr he's not quite 7 years old, but he's just like, why? Okay, I know people who voted for Donald Trump and who are planning on voting for him next year. And they said because he's an outsider, he's going to drain the swamp and all that sort of stuff. But he may drain the swamp, but the swamp creatures are just going to move to a different swamp. And if he's been completely enveloped with swamp creatures, the aforementioned Bill Barr, Rudy Giuliani, Steve Mnuchin.
George, I'll put this article in the chat. I did 3 parts, but I found Trump has appointed like probably 45 Georgetown alumni into his administration alone. Just from Georgetown, not from other Jesuit schools. I just linked part 1 of that post I did, all documenting from the official WhiteHouse.gov source. And then, I have an article from Newsmax this is when Trump was a candidate, but Trump had a group of 34 Catholic advisors assigned to him. 34 Catholic advisors assigned to Donald.
Well, so I would love to continue the show, but I should have got off the air about 5 minutes ago.
Oh, yeah, no worries at all. But hopefully, if there's any Trump supporters watching, hopefully we they've woken up to the reality that Trump is a Vatican asset and nothing else.
But in all fairness, then,
essentially, just going back to Hitler. So just he's kind of playing the same dialectic of Hitler. Hitler was all about we're trying to save Germany economically, while there was simultaneously police state legislation being put through, and it's the same thing with Trump, buffing up the police state. What's all about rhetoric? Oh, and we're here to make America's economy great again. Blah 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 blah. I see a very similar, propaganda tactic used.
And of course, both Hitler, people don't realize this. Hitler was a Roman Catholic. He was trained by the Jesuits at Lombok Abbey. Now,
George, just really quickly, people seen this. I took a photo on my community tab. I reprinted the quote right from Walter Schellenberg's book, where he says Hitler modeled the Nazi Party off the Jesuits. I just wanted to mention that. Jump back
and the SS were also modeled after the Jesuits. There's a famous quote, I'll say in English. I see in Himmler my new Ignatius of Loyola. He said it in German, but anyhow,
that was quoted. Edmund Paris. I got the physical of that book recently. That quote is quoted in Edmund Paris's book, "The Secret History of the Jesuits," published by Chick Publications. I may put my copy on archive.org soon, just to get a better scan of it. But that's the source of that quote. Just if people aren't
okay.
aware.
Yeah. So the actual quote, I believe, is in German. Im Himmler sehe ich mein neues Ignatius von Loyola. In Himmler, I see my new Ignatius of Loyola. So for those of you who speak German, forgive me for my bad pronunciation. But anyhow, so as I was saying, this is all Jesuitical theater. What has been going on the last couple of weeks in the U.S. Congress has just been another act in this long play called the Trump administration. As you just said a moment ago, he's had dozens of people who've gone to Georgetown, just Georgetown, not Gonzaga, not University of Santa Clara, not Fordham, just Georgetown. So how many other people has he had in his administration who've gone to other Catholic/SJ schools, Notre Dame, Villanova, or wherever, or just Catholic?
Well, I'm pretty sure. I think I documented this. There's the three straight. Yeah, so in Trump's administration, there's been 3 straight Jesuit-trained officials who have been executive secretary of the National Security Council. National Security Council has a lot of authority than the current intelligence structure of the U.S. government. But Joseph Kellogg was executive secretary of the National Security Council. He went to Jesuit Santa Clara. He's now Mike Pence's national security advisor. And then there is a Frederick H. Fleets, who is executive secretary of the National Security Council. He went to Jesuit Fordham and Jesuit St. Joseph's. And he was John Bolton's chief of staff, interestingly. And then after Frederick H. Fleets, you have currently Joan Virginia O'Hara, currently executive secretary of the National Security Council, and she went to Jesuit Loyola College in Maryland. So that's I think that's one example to show what you said is true. If you look into Trump's appointments, it's literally a Jesuitical swamp of appointments. I think that's almost like unprecedented power. 3 straight executive secretaries of the National Security Council, all SJ trained openly. I think that's the Jesuits are just flaunting their power at this point.
Well, and of course, it's just like occasionally they'll throw out 1 or 2 non-open Catholics. Like John Bolton is supposed to be a Lutheran, but according to Phelps, he's a Papal Knight of Malta, so he makes up for it. And as I said, Reagan did the same thing. He had maybe 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 non-Catholics who involved his administration. You had Edwin Meese, who was supposed to have been a Lutheran, but he was also a 33rd degree Freemason. But just about everybody else was you had Caspar Weinberger, who was a converter to Episcopalianism, but he's a Knight of Malta, or was a Knight of Malta.
Well, I know Reagan, he had, I think it was triple, but I know there was back-to-back appointments of him, Jesuit-trained U.S. ambassadors to the UN. Jean Kirkpatrick went to Georgetown, and then Vernon Walters went to Stonyhurst, and he's a Knight of Malta. Yeah, Reagan, there was a swamp around him for sure. His CIA director, William Casey, Knight of Malta, went to Jesuit Fordham. It was probably doubtlessly William Casey who wrote Executive Order 12333 from Ronald Reagan, which legalized the CIA to traffic drugs. Literally legalized that in 1981. And on my channel, I don't know if you've seen this footage, George. Like I found like 5 sets of footage from the Reagan Presidential Library where he's speaking to the Knights of Columbus and Knights of Malta openly, and like just sucking up to them. He openly says like, "Oh, he said my dad was a knight," and like it's literally 5 separate times Reagan spoke to the Knights, and Reagan was the president to recreate diplomatic relations to the Vatican, and that's why like you can see in the footage like the Knights of Columbus give him like standing ovations, like literally clapping for minutes on hand when he comes out because he was such a good Vatican puppet. And going back to the Knights, I found a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. I read this out in the video I did on national emergencies, but I found Roosevelt speaking to the Knights of Columbus all the way back in 1907, just sucking up to them then. In the exact same way. Johnny sent the photo of Roosevelt with Cardinal James Gibbons. Like they're basically like almost like hugging each other. So yeah, like and then just to show like to your point, George, like it'd be interesting to actually there needs to be a book written on all the secret Catholics that have been president of the United States. Because I think there's probably been over at least 25 secret Roman Catholic presidents. I'd be safe to say the last 10 of them have been secret Roman Catholics, besides Kennedy, the open Catholic.
Well, of course, you have Obama for all intents and purposes. When he spoke at Notre Dame, he basically said
he carries a rosary with him. I have that article. Obama carried a rosary given to him by Pope Francis all around everywhere. Like, what? Are you kidding me?
So, something that Obama mentioned in his 2009 speech at Notre Dame is he said essentially the late Joseph Cardinal Bernard, the Archbishop of Chicago, when Obama was moved there, essentially converted him to the Catholic Church. And one of his many mentors was Father Theodore Hesburgh, Father Teddy. Obama had several Svengalis, Greg Galuzzo, just almost.
Oh yeah, he's a Jesuit, right? Ex-Jesuit, is what they call him.
Yes. So anyhow, Eric, as I said, I'd love to continue the show, but as I said, I probably should have got off 15 minutes ago. So
no worries. Just any authors watching, I encourage you to write a book on how most of the Protestant, quote unquote, Protestant presidents since at least Lincoln's assassination have all been secret Roman Catholics, every single one.
So
that book should be published.
Okay, hopefully we can do a show next week because this Thursday coming up is our Thanksgiving. I know you have yours in early October, so I should be free this Thursday, the 28th, and the following day, Friday, the 29th, because that's like here in America we have Black Friday, which is traditionally has been the day after our Thanksgiving, where all the stores open up early and people try to kill each other to get the stuff that they really don't need or want.
No, that's it's crazy. You can see YouTube videos of people like brawls taking place, like people like fighting each other on Black Friday.
And I'm sure I've not looked this up, but if you do, I'm sure it's probably a Jesuit who came up with the idea of Black Friday.
Well, of course, the black robe Jesuit, of course. That's a great good correlation there.
No, as I said, it was probably a Jesuit or somebody like that who came up with the concept. It's just like the old joke is like Mrs. O'Leary's cow was actually a Jesuit priest disguised as a cow. But
the Jesuits actually invented modern cattle farming. Eusebio Kino, SJ. I wrote an article on it, and I cite scholarly journals from 1900 that claim Eusebio Kino is the father of modern day cattle farming.
Oh, okay. So maybe Mrs. O'Leary's cow was a Jesuit.
Yeah. Well, honestly, it's getting to that point where, you know, like TV characters are even like secret, like Jesuit coadjutors. Like that's how they control the real world, the real realm, and the fictional realm. You could say like the real realm at this point is a fictional realm with how codified the legal system is everywhere. But for instance, like Sterling Archer, the quote world's greatest secret agent, went to Jesuit Georgetown University. You know, for instance. So and that just goes to the Tupper Saucy quote, where like the Jesuit Ratio Studioratum and the Jesuit College. Pardon me there. He said the Jesuit College, and Tupper Saucy said in Rulers of Evil that the Jesuit College becomes like the anchor of society, and like the entire societal framework becomes based around the Jesuit College and the Ratio Studioratum. And that's why so many fictional characters in our quote unquote TV programs today, like the fictional characters went to the Jesuit schools, like Jack Ryan and Tom Clancy, perfect example.
Well, of course, I brought this up.
Tom Clancy himself, 2 Jesuit degrees, devout Roman Catholic. The Jack Ryan, he's basically like the American hero in like the video game realm, and like the fictional literature.
Well, just one example. This is before there was a TV show called MASH, aired in America from 1972 to 93. One of the characters on there was Father Francis John Francis Mulcahy, played. Well, there was different actors played, but the main one was William Christopher, who actually was supposed to be a Protestant. But Mulcahy, his character was a Jesuit, and he went to the fictional Jesuit high school in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So, of course, Mulcahy was one of the most beloved characters on the show.
Of course. That's how they do it. They're clever. That's how they do it. In the fighting, I know you got to go, George. Just I'll wrap up with this. In the fighting 69th, like it was so obvious how the Jesuits were making devout Catholic Jesuit trained Pat O'Brien's character, the real life Father Francis Duffy. They were just blowing him up as a hero in that movie. So over the top. Like he's rescuing, like lifting up like a 400-pound like wooden like log, letting like all the soldiers crawl up from underneath, like so over the top, blowing up Father Francis Duffy as a hero in that movie. And there's a statue of this guy in Times Square in real life.
Well, good for them.
And I know you mentioned in the movie on Oliver Cromwell, like there was many like Catholic actors and directors and producers who directed this movie about Protestant Oliver Cromwell, and predictably they made him look like a monster, like just like a brutal dictator, predictably.
Well, of course, you had to. The most famous adaptation of Cromwell is Cromwell, which came out in 1970, starring Richard Harris, devout Irish Roman Catholic, and it was trained by the Jesuits. So, yeah, of course. And so maybe we can do a show this week, like Friday or something. So we'll keep in touch, and I do have to be going. So we'll have a good day and have a good weekend, Eric.
Yeah, you too, George. I'll keep in touch, and all the best. Take care. Okay. And thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
For those of you who are living or listening in the States, a happy Thanksgiving. Ours is coming up this Thursday. And we'll take care.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving. I know just looking at the demographics, I got a lot of American viewers on my channel. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you south of the border.
Okay, well, thank you. And and for those of you north of the border, have a good Thursday.
Oh, good. Great show today, George. And thanks everyone again for tuning in. All the best. God bless everyone. See you on the next one.